Chapter 128. This was the reason Yang Chendong came up with. He didn't say that he couldn't catch Xianxia. This was to give Qian Xingbao hope and allow Tang Tong to report back. As for whether he could catch Xianxia or not, it wouldn't be long before Walla's messenger couldn't even protect himself. When that happened, who would pay attention to Xianxia? Even if someone saw Xianxia, his identity would be changed. He would no longer be a madman but a hero who killed the enemy. Tang Tong was startled when he heard the reason. He then asked suspiciously, "Did Xianxia really escape? Can we really catch him? Does Yang Xianma know the consequences if we catch him?" "I know. Don't worry, Lord Tang. By the way, all of you must be tired from the trip. I've already prepared 5,000 taels of silver outside. When Lord Tang leaves, please distribute it to all of you." Since Tang Tong asked such a question, it meant that he agreed with the reason. He was just worried. Since the matter had been settled, Yang Chendong naturally had to show sufficient friendliness. 5,000 taels of silver was just enough to fill a large wooden chest. Using this to settle this matter was worth it no matter how one looked at it. Whether it was at the seaside of Crimson City, Immortal Abode, or Sky Beyond Heaven, Yang Chendong could be described as earning a fortune every day. Since he didn't lack money, any problem that could be solved with silver taels wouldn't be a problem anymore. With a reason to report back in silver taels, Tang Tong's expression instantly turned for the better. He cupped his fists and smiled. "Yang Xianma is too courteous. Since Xianxia isn't in the manor and has escaped to Jianing residence, I will report back now. As for Lord Tang's decision, it will be up to the higher-ups." Of course. Yang Chendong chuckled. He knew that Tang Tong wouldn't make things difficult for him on this matter. After this matter, the friendship between the two deepened. Of course, the smile on Tang Tong's face became even brighter. Reporting. Just as Yang Chendong and Tang Tong were laughing and looking at each other, looking like they were getting along very well, Yang Wu suddenly ran in from outside the door. Because he was running too fast, he almost tripped over the door sill. "What's going on? Don't you see that young master's talking with someone?" Seeing Yang Wu lose his composure, Tiger's Mane stepped forward and reprimanded him softly. "What happened?" Yang Chendong noticed Tiger's Mane's loss of composure and was somewhat puzzled. In his impression, these Yang family retainers had long been trained to remain calm even if Mount Tai were to collapse in front of them. He really didn't know what had happened to make them behave like this. Third young master is here. He has already entered the manor." Yang Wu didn't have time to explain anything to Tiger's Mane. When he saw Yang Chendong's question, he immediately answered. "Third princess? Princess Changda? Why is she here?" Yang Chendong was slightly taken aback when he heard this. Princesses, especially after reaching adulthood, weren't allowed to leave the palace as they pleased? Then why did she come to his manor without even greeting him? What was going on? Yang Chendong was flabbergasted. Tang Tong, who had been chatting happily with him, also had a similarly confused look on his face. He also didn't understand why the princess would leave the palace, and why she would come to the Yang manor. While the two of them were puzzled, or rather unable to react for a moment, the sound of noisy footsteps came from outside the side hall. Then they heard a eunuch shout in a high-pitched voice, "The princess has arrived." As the voice fell, a group of junior eunuchs entered the hall. Then, under the escort of a dozen palace maids, Princess Changda, dressed in a pink gown, walked in and stood in front of Yang Chendong. Speaking of which, this was the second time the two of them had met. "Greetings, Princess Qiansui." Tang Tong reacted quickly. Once he saw Princess Changda, he knelt on the ground. Yang Chendong, who was at the side, was only slightly taken aback before he had no choice but to kneel on the ground as well. "Rise." Fortunately, before Yang Chendong's knees touched the ground, Princess Changda had already spoken. "Thank you, Qiansui." Yang Chendong knew when to stop and hurriedly got up. His movements were even faster than Tang Tong's. Fortunately, the princess's attention wasn't on him. Instead, she stared at Tang Tong and said, "I recognize you. You're Tang Tong, right?" Hearing that the princess actually recognized him, Tang Tong's face was naturally filled with joy. Princess has a good memory. This lowly one is Tang Tong, and now, Tang Tong seemed to want to use this opportunity to show off. He had heard that Princess Changda and the emperor were siblings from the same mother, and had a very good relationship. With his status, fawning on the emperor was a little far-fetched, but fawning on the princess was a shortcut. But before he could finish, Princess Xianxia had already spoken. Why did you bring so many people to the Yang family manor? Did Yang Jima commit any crime? This he didn't. Tang Tong didn't know what the princess meant, but from her tone he could tell that she was a little angry, so he wanted to explain himself. However, Princess Xianxia had no intention of listening to his explanation. Instead, she waved her hand impatiently. Alright, as long as Yang Jima didn't do anything wrong, then don't create such a scene in the future. Don't think that just because royal brother gave you power, you can really do whatever you want. Let me tell you, others might be afraid of you, but this princess isn't. If you anger this princess, we'll see who's the one who loses out in front of royal brother. After Princess Xianxia's words, Tang Tong felt the world spin. It seemed that the third princess was here to support Yang Chendong. Fortunately, she didn't give the order to search the manor. Otherwise, she really didn't know how to clean up this mess. Others might not be able to comment on the matters of the eunuch group, but as a member of the royal family, Princess Xianxia could. Not only was she on good terms with the queen of the imperial harem, Empress Qian, she was also the emperor's biological sister. She was greatly appreciated by the emperor. This could be seen from the grand birthday banquet that was held a while ago. Tang Tong broke out in cold sweat, his lips trembling. He knew that if he didn't clarify today's matter, there would be consequences later on. Thus he didn't care so much and lowered his head. Long live Princess, this lowly one is here on the orders of Supervisor Chen Xingbao to investigate this matter. What's there to investigate? Don't think that this princess doesn't know. It's just beating up a Walla envoy, but you didn't investigate clearly who provoked them first before arresting people? Also, the one who beat him up was just an ordinary servant of the Yang family. You even bothered the Eastern commander over such a small matter. If that's the case, then if someone from the embroidered uniform guards made a mistake, shouldn't they also ask the Qin who directly in charge of you for an explanation? Princess Xianxia's coquettish voice resounded throughout the entire side hall. Her words left Tang Tong speechless. He originally thought that the third princess just happened to be there at the right time. But with these words, who wouldn't understand that she had clearly come prepared? She was even here specifically to solve the problem for Yang Chendong. At this moment, Tang Tong finally understood that with the third princess backing Yang Chendong, he wasn't someone he could mess with in the future. Yes, long live princess is right. I will go back and report this to eunuch Qian. Tang Tong nodded his head as he spoke. From the looks of it, he looked exactly like a pug. Tang Tong left, but he didn't forget to take the chest of silver that Yang Chendong had prepared with him. From this point of view, he had accepted the goodwill. He had already promised that if he didn't take the silver this time, it would mean that he would have to draw a line with the Eastern commander in the future. Princess Xianxia came and reprimanded Tang Tong, showing her rude and unreasonable side. As the outside world said, she was incomparably coquettish. However, when everyone in the side hall was reprimanded by her, she indeed looked at Yang Chendong with a smile like a flower. It was as if she was staring at an extremely exquisite ancient artifact. This gaze made sixth young Master Yang feel as if he had become a rare animal in the zoo. It was a very bad feeling. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Yang Chendong was the first to speak, cupping his fists in a grateful manner. Thank you for speaking up for me, Princess. Chendong really has nothing to repay you with. Sai, how can there be nothing to repay you with? You are so capable, you must have a lot of fun things. Just take out 2 of them and let this princess see them. Princess Xianxia spoke casually, but in Yang Chendong's ears he was extremely wary. He had never underestimated anyone, even if the girl in front of him was only 14 years old. She had grown up in the imperial family since she was young, so she had matured earlier than others. After getting used to too many dirty things, it was impossible for her to not be mature. Usually, every word of this kind of person had a deep meaning. Everything depended on how the person who heard it interpreted it. If you ignored these words, you might unknowingly suffer a great loss. Not knowing whether this was a test or not, Yang Chendong pondered for a moment before raising his head and saying with a smile, "Princess, you must be joking. Whatever Chendong has, the imperial family has as well. Even the world belongs to the great Ming dynasty. If there is anything here that princess likes, you can take it away." Is that true? Sensing Yang Chendong's cautious and guarded manner, Princess Xianxia smiled. Not to mention she had inherited the Zhou family's bloodline. Regardless of her temper, she was beautiful and charming. Under this smile there were many things to admire. Yes. Yang Qindong's gaze tightened. Then he felt that it wasn't very friendly to look directly at the princess, so he looked away and agreed. Ah, very good. Since that's the case, then this princess won't stand on ceremony. Princess Xianxia giggled. Then her gaze began to size up the side hall. However, it was only for a moment before it finally landed on Yang Qindong and the jade pendant on his waist. Chapter 129. Yang Qindong was also sizing up Princess Xianxia. When he saw her gaze fall on the jade pendant he carried with him, his heart tightened. This was a waist pendant with the words peace engraved on it. It wasn't very valuable, but it was given to him by his father when he was 1 year old. It had an extraordinary meaning. Princess, this was given to me by my father. This, what? Dong Shuai just said that everything here belongs to the Zhou family and that we can take it as we wish. Are you going back on your words now? Princess Xianxia said sternly. Her face, which was originally pleasant to look at, changed in an instant, giving people a lot of pressure. This pressure obviously couldn't scare Yang Qindong, but it reminded him of her identity. Indeed, they were all from the Zhou family. None of them were easy to get along with. They changed their faces faster than flipping a book. Not wanting to be a busybody, he immediately took off his waist pendant and handed it over with both hands. Since the princess likes it, you can have it. Ah, that's more like it. As if she really liked this waist pendant, Princess Xianxia stretched out her jade-like hands to receive it. Then she regained the innocent expression of a girl. Alright, this princess has helped you solve your problem. Asking for a waist pendant from you isn't considered bullying me. Ah, let's go. Princess Xianxia left just like that, not staying for long. She probably knew that with her current status, staying too long in the Yang family village would easily attract criticism. Although she wasn't afraid of public opinion, it was better to avoid as much trouble as possible. The princess left, leaving Yang Qindong alone in the side hall, deep in thought. The third princess's sudden appearance and quick departure made him a little uncertain. If he had to pinpoint her intentions, it would be that she had only taken a waist pendant. He didn't believe that a spoiled princess would care so much about an ordinary waist pendant. Even when Qiao Yin and Lady Shui appeared in the side hall, hand in hand, Yang Qindong still couldn't figure out what was going on. On the other hand, the two women seemed to be aware of his predicament. Because Qiao Yin had been with Yang Qindong for a long time, she was the most courageous. She bluntly said, "Young master, I'm afraid the princess has fallen for you." What? Hearing this, Yang Qindong was shocked. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about it, but that he didn't think it existed at all. Although information was not so developed at that time, the matter of him falling in love with Hu Yan, the daughter of the Hu clan, would not be a secret in front of the emperor. Since the emperor knew about this matter, it was impossible for him to marry the princess to him. One had to know that according to the customs of that time, when a princess married a man of lower status, her status was even higher than that of a concubine. Not only that, as the emperor's son-in-law, he could only have this one woman in his life. Even the servant girl to warm the bed had to be chosen from the princess's own dowry. At that time, this was a tyrannical treaty for men. However, if one wanted to marry the princess, one had to pay a price in order to obtain benefits. Speaking of which, this was very fair. However, this kind of fairness might be useful for a destitute scholar with no power or influence. But whether it was power or money, what did Yang Qindong lack? How could he possibly marry only the princess and restrict his own freedom? The emperor should be aware of this. In addition, for the sake of Hu Ming and Hu Zhongning, he probably wouldn't have this idea. Thus he took the initiative to omit it. Now that the two women had mentioned it, he carefully recalled Princess Xianxia's attitude towards him. Only then did he realize. Princess Xianxia's attitude did change a lot, but that was just her nature. The spoiled her would still act coquettishly in front of Zhu Xian and ask for benefits. In front of others she was even more unscrupulous. As for the waist ornament, it was just a token of love. Thinking of this, Yang Qindong's expression changed again and again. He sucked in a breath of cold air and said, "This can't be done. Young master, since this can't be done, we have to think of a way." Qiao Yin and Lady Shui both stepped forward, looking concerned. They could not be concerned. If the young master really married the princess, what would they do? If the princess was unreasonable and didn't allow them to stay in the Yang family, They could only leave. At that time they wouldn't even have a place to cry. For their own rights they had to do something. Yes, the young master will think of a way. However, we have to do something right now. Yang Qindong's first thought was to immediately send the betrothal gifts to the Hu family. Then he prepared to ask for the name. Although this situation was complicated, the process that had to be walked through was not something that could be omitted. But as soon as the thought appeared, Yang Qindong rejected it. Not for any other reason but because this year was a particularly important year. Before the changes in the Timu castle happened, he couldn't do anything big. Once he provoked someone and caused unnecessary trouble, it would be bad if it led to changes. Fortunately, Princess Xianxia was still young. Moreover, she was only testing the waters today. Even if she wanted to ask the emperor to grant her marriage, she still needed an opportunity. Now that he was resting at home in the name of being sick, it probably wasn't the best time to grant her marriage. Of course, the reason why Yang Qindong was so confident about this was because of Wang Zhen. He and Wang Zhen were in a cooperative relationship. They had agreed to pay him a large sum of money next year. Before the money was in his hands, he definitely didn't want to become the emperor's son-in-law and establish a connection with the imperial family. If Zhou Xian had such a thought, Wang Zhen would do everything possible to stop him. This was equivalent to buying time and opportunities for himself. As for after the big event, no matter what the situation was, at least Yang Qindong wouldn't be as passive as he was now. When the time came, he could find an opportunity to act first and report later. At that time, even if the emperor knew, he couldn't let Princess Xianxia marry a married man and share a man with others. With a plan in mind, Yang Qindong regained his confidence. Okay, you don't need to tidy up here. Call Tiger's mane in. I have something to ask him. Seeing that Yang Qindong seemed to be thinking about something, Qiao Yin and Lady Shui looked at each other and left. They knew that all their hopes could only be placed on the young master. They also believed that the young master would be able to solve the problem. This came from a kind of trust. At the same time, it also showed that women in ancient times were not independent. Tang Tong went back and brought back the news that Yangxi was likely to escape to Jianing Prefecture. She also brought back Princess Xiangxia's attitude. Seeing that Tang Tong came back empty-handed, Qian Sengbao's face was cold and he was even prepared to hold her accountable. But when he heard that even Princess Xiangxia came out and said those words, he knew that it was unwise to make an issue out of Yang Qindong being beaten up by Yangxi. Since there were no benefits, he didn't want to be involved in it. He immediately arranged for a little eunuch to pass a message to the magazine king, saying that the criminal was on the run and was being arrested. He then threw the matter aside. The magazine king was originally angry because of the incident with the guard captain Tuj. When the eunuch passed the message, he was even angrier. But soon his attention was diverted. It was not for any other reason, but because the Wallace spy in the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty had contacted the buyer who could buy high-yield potatoes. Compared to a guard captain being beaten up, high-yield potatoes were more important to the fate of the Walla. The magazine king put all his attention on the potato matter and even arranged for his most trusted subordinate, Tuj, to handle this matter. In his words, if this matter was done well, it would be a great merit. When the time came, he would also have a merit in front of his brother, Yeshen. At that time, whether he would be promoted or rewarded, it wouldn't be a problem. Now that there was something to do, Tuj temporarily put aside the grudges in his hands. He brought 4 skilled subordinates and a spy to guide the group of 6 to meet with the potato seller and make a deal. Perhaps in order to gain the trust of the seller first provided 2 full bags of potato seeds. When these things were sent to the relay station, the magazine king personally checked them. After confirming that there were no mistakes, the meeting was arranged. The seller seemed to be a very careful person. He arranged for the meeting to be in a small courtyard in a remote alley. Because of the location, very few people from the warden's office paid attention to this place. On the surface, there seemed to be no problem with the safety. However, this was still a transaction in the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty. If something went wrong and the Ming Dynasty took notice of their plot, it would be a big problem. Tuagu was in favor of trading in such a remote location. But for safety, he still made 2 preparations. First, he didn't have much money on him. This way, even if the other party wanted to do something without enough benefits, they wouldn't easily make a move. Second, he assigned his 4 subordinates to the surroundings of the alley. If there was any trouble, the 4 of them would be able to call out to each other from a distance. He didn't believe that there was someone who could silently deal with his 4 subordinates. As long as one of them noticed that something was wrong, they could shout and attract the attention of others. After arranging everything, Tuj brought the spy to the small alley. After observing for a while and confirming that there weren't any accidents, they entered the empty courtyard. Tuj was confident that he had arranged everything perfectly. However, he didn't know that there was something called a sniper rifle. He also didn't know that this thing could be installed with a silencer that he had never heard of before. This silencer could guarantee that it could take a person's life from 1,000 meters away as easily as taking something out of a pocket. Just as Tuoga was about to enter the small courtyard, Dao Xiao and the other 10 members of the second guard squad had already arrived. They were carefully inspecting the guns and equipment. Chapter 130. The so-called seller was actually someone from the security bureau in disguise. Their purpose was to frame the Walla's envoy. Defense was the best defense. If you don't want others to keep an eye on you, an excellent way is to make the opponent unable to pay attention to you. If you're already in trouble, how would you have time to keep an eye on others? This was the task Yang Chendong arranged for Tiger's Mane. After receiving the task, he passed it to Yang San and asked him to arrange the details. As a secret organization, Yang San and his men were much more professional than Walla's spies. This was not only because they were better trained but also because they were rich and well-equipped. With the advantage in all aspects, it was only natural that Tile's spies had always been under the control of the security bureau. To lure them out and give them something that could move them was not difficult at all. On the contrary, it was very smooth. What was even more unexpected was the appearance of Tuoga. This person had once slandered the 6th young master in front of the Yang family manor's gate. Everyone had long wanted to kill this person to vent their anger. However, considering the other party's identity, they did not make a move. This time he took the initiative to come to them. How could they let him go? Not long after Tuoger and the Wallace spy entered the small courtyard, Yang San appeared with another subordinate of the security bureau. There was also a carriage with many bags on it. It was impossible to see the appearance of the bags in the dark. However, considering the items to be traded, it was obvious what was in the bags. Under the attention of the 4 Wallace guards, Yang San walked into the small courtyard and saw Tugo, who had arrived first. "You have a lot of potatoes in your hands?" Seeing the person who came at the agreed time and saw that the other party came in a carriage, Tugo was satisfied but still asked cautiously. "Yes." Yang San's face was indifferent, like an emotionless humanoid machine. Since the person in front of him dared to look down on the 6th young master, it would not be an exaggeration to cut him into pieces. However, considering that Dao Xiao and the others still needed some time to complete their task, he forcefully suppressed the thought of attacking and continued to deal with Tuoger. Yang San's attitude was so cold that Tuoga felt a trace of displeasure from the bottom of his heart. However, considering that he was not here to make friends but to make a deal, he suppressed his dissatisfaction and asked again, "Who are you? Why were there so many potato seeds? As far as I know, this thing hasn't been popularized in the Ming dynasty yet. The seeds of this thing should be very precious." "Are you an officer?" Yang San answered Tuj's question unhurriedly. "No." Tugger shook his head. He didn't understand why the other party would ask such a question. Instead, it was the Valle spy who came with him who shook his head bitterly when he heard this. This general's bodyguard captain didn't know anything about the secret battlefront at all. How could he ask about the other party's background? It was impossible for the other party to tell him. As expected, Yang San used a gaze filled with disdain to look at Tuoger and said, "Since you aren't an official, why are you asking me these questions? You really are an idiot." Tuoger suddenly realized that he had said something wrong. However, the other party directly called him an idiot and angered him. He glared and said with a fierce expression, "You dare to scold me?" Just as Tuoger was about to flip out, the security bureau agent who had been tidying up the carriage walked into the small courtyard. According to the previous agreement, once this person entered the courtyard, it meant that the Walla agents guarding outside had all been eliminated. A strange smile flashed across Yang San's face. "So what if I scold you? I still want to kill you." After saying this, a small crossbow appeared in Yang San's hand. At this moment he was aiming it at the angry Tuoger who was about to draw his sword. "Let's talk nicely. Let's talk nicely." Seeing Yang San take out a weapon, The Walla agent felt that the atmosphere wasn't right. He immediately tried to ease the atmosphere with a smile. How could Yang San, who already had the intention to kill, stop his killing intent because of these words? A cold smile flashed across his face. Let's talk nicely. However, it's too late to say anything now. From the moment you entered this small courtyard, you were already destined to be dead. At the same time as his voice fell, his right index finger moved and pulled the trigger on the crossbow. Under the force of the spring mechanism, an arrow flew through the air and shot into Tuogur's chest. At the same time, outside the small courtyard, 4 hidden snipers simultaneously fired their bullets into the head of Tuogur's subordinate, who was completely unaware of the impending death. Among them, 3 bullets hit the middle of his eyebrows while 1 missed and only hit the forehead. However, the powerful lethality still took his life in the first instant. The pitiful Tuogur still maintained his posture of drawing his sword. He had an overbearing appearance as if he wanted to take the lead. He didn't know that the people he had arranged outside had all been wiped out. Furthermore, when he thought about how the other party attacked without the slightest hesitation. How was this a trade? It was clear that they were here to kill him. When Yang San made his move, his subordinates also took out the same crossbow and aimed it at the Walla spy. If you want to live, don't shout. Otherwise you will end up like him. The Walla spy, who had been scared silly by the scene in front of him, was already stunned. In the end, his mission was just to gather information. He was also trained on how to hide himself. His skills were only average. Now that even Tuogur, who was extremely good at fighting, was killed without being able to fight back, what else could he do? In order to save his life, the spy stood there obediently and allowed the people from the security bureau to tie him up tightly. Even his mouth was stuffed tightly. There was another sound of footsteps outside the courtyard. Dao Xiao led the second team to clean up the 4 Walla guards who were hiding in the dark and carried their bodies inside. Let's get to work. Create a scene and bring him back alive. He must know a lot of Walla's secrets. A sinister smile flashed across Yang San's face. Perhaps it was because of his work, but he had become much more sinister. Even in the security bureau, few people dared to interact with him too much. They seemed to be afraid of the actual leader of the security bureau. Half an hour later, a big fire suddenly appeared outside the courtyard. The fire attracted the soldiers of the 5 cities warden's office. When they put out the fire with all their might, they saw the scene in the courtyard clearly. A few men wearing Walla guards' uniforms were lying dead on the ground. In front of them there were many scattered potatoes. This matter involved the Walla guards. The 5 cities warden's office quickly reported this matter. Not long after, the Eastern Faction Warden's office and the embroidered uniform guards men arrived one after another. The leader was the Qianhu official Tang Tong. After he recognized Tuogur's identity at a glance, his eyes flashed with anger. Another half an hour later, the magazine king, who was still waiting for news at the relay station, looked outside uneasily. Suddenly, the door of the courtyard he was resting in was pushed open from the outside. Then a group of embroidered uniform guard rushed in with torches. Not good. Instinctively, the magazine king turned around and took the scimitar that was hanging on the wall. When he turned around, Tang Tong and a few other embroidered uniform guardsmen had already rushed into the room. Emissary, are you still going to resist? Looking at the magazine king's current appearance, Tang Tong sneered. What are you doing? Since you know that I am an emissary, why are you treating me like this? Aren't you afraid that the Ming dynasty will fall out with the Walla? The magazine king relied on his identity as an emissary to threaten them. I don't know about the matter between the Ming dynasty and the Walla, but now there is evidence that your guard captain has been buying prohibited potatoes everywhere. Now that he has been caught red-handed, I'll have to trouble the emissary to come with us and explain clearly. Tang Tong's eyes were full of threat. If the magazine king dared to resist, he would take action. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. Although he knew that Tuogur had messed up the matter, the magazine king still had some confidence when he thought about how he was the emissary of the Walla. Okay, I'll come with you and see what you have to say. The magazine king put away his scimitar, snorted coldly and strode in front of Tang Tong. Tuogur was killed and the magazine king was arrested. This was Yang Qindong's revenge and also successfully diverted the attention of the magazine king. Now that the magazine king couldn't even protect himself, how could he have the time to pay attention to Yang Qindong? Regrettably, the periodical king was, after all, the emissary of Tile. Especially after he found out about Tugger's death, he pushed all the blame onto the dead and complained about the injustice he had suffered. Without direct evidence, naturally no one could do anything to the magazine king. However, this matter directly caused the court to be disgusted with the Walla. In particular, the Minister of Revenue Wang Zhou threw out the problem of the large number of people in the Walla's diplomatic group. When the potato had just appeared, Wang Zhou had suggested to the emperor that such a good thing should not be allowed to spread. Otherwise, when those foreign countries had enough food, they would raise their soldiers and horses. From there, they would have the ability to cause trouble for the Ming dynasty. This time, the Walla actually wanted to take the potatoes back, which could be considered as touching his reverse scale. In the court, he said that according to the rules of the court, the number of people in the diplomatic group should be limited to 50 people. However, this time the Walla actually sent a group of 3,000 people. Just the food and drink alone cost a lot of money every day. It was really like a stone that stirred up 1,000 ripples. When the other officials heard about this, they all had a shocked expression. Zhou Xian, who was sitting high on the dragon throne, had a blank expression on his face at first, then it turned into anger. He looked at Wang Zhen, who was standing beside him, and asked, "Teacher, is this really true?" Chapter 131. Wang Zhen was one of the first to know about this, but considering the benefits he received from the Walla before, he wanted to minimize the problem and let them leave. But now that it was exposed in the imperial court, some words had to be said. Replying to the emperor, the actual number is only around 2,500 people. 3,000 is a false number. Just as Wang Zhen had said, this time, Vala had indeed sent out 2,500 tributary envoys. In order to receive more rewards, they had falsely reported 3,000 people. It was normal for the Walla to falsely claim rewards. Because Wang Zhen colluded with the Walla and accepted bribes from Xianxia, he pretended not to know. But this time the emperor took the initiative to ask, and in front of the civil and military officials he could not hide anything. Good. Are they here to pay tribute or to ask for something? After hearing Wang Zhen's answer, Zhou Xian's face became very ugly, and he announced in the imperial court, "Teacher, since you have received the previous diplomatic groups, this time I will leave it to you to solve. I don't care what method you use, but in short, it is not so easy to take advantage of me." Seeing Zhou Xian angry, Wang Zhen immediately said, "Please rest assured, Emperor, this subject knows what to do." After the court was adjourned, Wang Zhen did not treat the king of the periodical in the same amiable manner as before. Instead, he ordered the Ministry of Rights to give out rewards according to the number of people who were present. He also rashly reduced the price of the Valago horses by 4/5, paying Valeso only 1/5 of what he had asked for. This caused the periodical king's wish not to be fulfilled, and he angrily returned. Not only that, when the large diplomatic group returned, they were strictly inspected and all the things they brought were searched. Rummaging through the books on the grounds of preventing illegal items made the magazine king lose face. After the angry periodical king returned to the Walla, he reported to Xianxia with exaggerated details. When Xianxia heard this, he was furious and immediately gathered the army, using the Ming dynasty's reduction of rewards as an excuse to split the army into 4 and attack the Ming dynasty, personally leading a large army to attack Datong. They were already prepared to attack the Ming dynasty, and this time they had a suitable excuse. For a time, the border area was filled with the flames of war, and alarms were constantly sounding. Walla's cavalry was ferocious, and they quickly advanced to the south. The Ming dynasty soldiers guarding the northwest were defeated several times, and they hurriedly requested reinforcements from the capital. Walla's betrayal and the start of the war. Once the news reached the capital, it caused a huge commotion. For a moment, they were all guessing which general the emperor would send as reinforcements to conquer Walla. While everyone was guessing, one person's heart beat wildly. He thought that his chance to become famous in the world had come. This person was the head eunuch of the imperial palace, the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Wang Zhen. Even though Wang Zhen, who could be said to be able to cover the sky with one hand, could be said to have absolute power at that time. Although some people had no choice but to rely on him because of his power, he was still a eunuch in the end. Other than his trusted aides, no one knew how to secretly curse him. If Wang Zhen were to fall from power one day, the first to attack him would be those who relied on him. Furthermore, Wang Zhen might not always be able to cover the sky with one hand, because his power came from Emperor Zhou Xian. As long as Zhou Xian no longer trusted him and was suspicious of him, he only needed to casually say a few words to make Wang Zhen lose the entire game. No matter how much power he had, he could not jump out of Zhou Xian's 5 fingers. This was what Wang Zhen was worried about. If he wanted to become an evergreen tree, he had to truly grasp the Ming dynasty's military power and reach the peak of power. To achieve this, it was far from enough to arrange a few trusted aides. Only by leading the great Ming dynasty's army to victory could he truly establish his prestige in the army. For this reason, he decided to urge Zhou Xian to personally lead the northern expedition to Walla. If he succeeded as the leader, he would naturally have great merits. At that time, he would have many opportunities to touch the military power. Once this desire appeared in his heart, he had a feeling that he could not retreat. His whole body felt as if it was on fire, making him unable to sit still for a moment. Where is His Majesty now? Wang Zhen's heart was in turmoil. He really wanted to ask Zhou Xian to go to war, so he asked a little eunuch beside him. Replying to eunuch Wang, His Majesty is resting with the Empress. Good, let's go see His Majesty. Wang Zhen stood up, tidied up his sleeves and walked straight to the rear palace with firm steps. At this time, Zhou Xian was resting in Empress Qian's palace. His complexion was not very good. Vala's violation of the border was somewhat out of his expectations and caught him off guard. When he saw that more and more requests for help were coming in from the border, he decided to leave the Palace of Heavenly Purity and go to the Empress Palace to relax. As for how to deal with this matter and who to send, the important officials would probably come up with a plan. This was one of the benefits of being the emperor. If he ran into problems or problems he didn't want to deal with, he could just toss them to someone else. Empress Qian was extremely virtuous. When she saw that Zhou Xian's mood wasn't too good, she had all the maids and eunuchs leave the palace. She was the only one accompanying the emperor to rest in his chambers. She even suggested that if the emperor was too bored, he should take a trip to the Immortal abode to relax. Zhou Xian was somewhat moved by the empress' suggestion. The Immortal abode had been open for more than half a year now, and there was always an endless supply of delicious food and fun things to do inside. When he heard people talk about it in the past, he would always look forward to it. However, because he was the emperor, leaving the palace would cause too much of a ruckus. That was why he had always suppressed this thought. Now that the empress was so supportive of him, he was truly moved. Empress Qian was worried about Zhou Xian's health after seeing how distressed he was, so she made this suggestion. When she saw that the emperor was actually moved, she smiled sweetly. If your majesty wishes to go, you can disguise yourself as a commoner. However, you must bring more people with you. Your safety is still very important. Yes, the empress is absolutely right. How about this? We will immediately call General Fan Zhong over and have him arrange for more people to protect us. Zhou Xian couldn't wait any longer. There was a trace of urgency in his voice. The emperor issued a decree, and General Fan Zhong quickly brought over 100 Huban soldiers to prepare for the emperor's departure. It was at this time that Wang Zhen arrived. He was dressed in official robes. Only the eunuchs who served the emperor were allowed to wear such clothing. As soon as Wang Zhen arrived, Zhou Xian happily said, "Teacher, immediately change into a set of casual clothes and accompany us to the Immortal abode. Let's see what new delicacies they have." Originally, Wang Zhen had been thinking about how to broach the subject of his personal expedition with Zhou Xian. Now that the emperor wanted to go to the Immortal abode, it was absolutely quiet and there were even private rooms there. It was much more convenient to discuss matters. He immediately agreed. As he went to change his clothes, he also arranged for someone to notify the last-ranked eunuch, Mao Mu, and have him notify Yang Chendong as soon as possible so that he could make the necessary arrangements. Yang Village. Lung Feng from Crimson City had arrived. He was personally led by Xiao Feng, who was already a battalion commander. Bai Zhu, the captain of the Phantom Sniper Squad, had also arrived with them. There were a total of 20 members, 10 of them snipers and 10 of them observers. When Xiao Feng arrived, he was immediately called to the study to give a detailed report of the situation on Little Ryukyu Island. From Xiao Feng's words, Yang Chendong learned that the majority of Little Ryukyu Island was already under the control of the Yang clan. Only the central northern region had not been recovered. This was because the population was too small and they needed time to digest it. Otherwise, they would have been able to take down the entire Ryukyu Island in one go. Currently, on Little Ryukyu Island, the number of local aboriginals and the commoners that Deng Maochi had taken away during his uprising added up to about 400,000 people. Among them, there were only 4,000 people who had truly passed the various tests to become members of Leng Feng. There were 2,000 in the army and 2,000 in the navy for a total of 40 companies. According to the statistics of 4 companies per battalion, there were 5 battalions in the navy and 5 battalions in the army. As for the auxiliary soldiers and the children's regiment, there were close to 20,000 people. Very good. There's no need to rush the matter of Leng Feng changing from a battalion to a regiment. After listening to Xiao Feng's account, Yang Qindong's face was filled with satisfaction. Tall buildings were built from the ground up. The foundation was often the most important. If the organization of the army was messed up at the beginning, it would take a lot of effort to correct it later on. Rather than spending a lot of effort to reorganize it later on, it was better to lay a good foundation from the beginning and take one step at a time. After asking about the development of the army, he asked about the progress of the factories. He even asked about Yu Qian and Xin Yu's situation. According to Xiao Feng, the development and construction of the various cities in the factory were being carried out in an orderly manner. Other than the ships that went to the west to search for rubber and the power plant that could not be started, the other factories had entered the planning stage of development. The various goods that they produced were already self-sufficient and could be considered for expansion. Yu Qian and Xin Yu's situation was also very stable. When they first arrived at Resin City, they were shocked by the technological development and everything that they saw. As they gained a deeper understanding, they showed great interest in these developments and even took the initiative to participate in some things. However, when Xiao Feng said, however, he was still carefully observing Yang Qindong's expression. If you have something to say, just say it. Yang Qindong smiled. He knew that as the system grew stronger, the gap between his relationship with the people under him would also grow bigger. However, he still wanted to hear more of the truth. He did not want to lie to his superiors. Yes. Xiao Feng quickly responded, then said, however, when they found out that all the changes were related to the 6th young master and had nothing to do with the Ming dynasty, they showed strong resistance. They put down the work at hand and stayed in the house that we arranged for them. Chapter 132. Yu Qian and Xin Yu were officials of the Great Ming dynasty. One was a self-proclaimed Wen Tianxiang, while the other was an imperial censor. They were both people with integrity. Yang Qindong had long thought that the other party would not accept the changes in Crimson City so easily, especially since it was not under the management of the Great Ming dynasty. There would be resistance and incomprehension, but these two people were people who valued the country more than the king. As long as they saw that the ones benefiting were the common people, their thoughts would eventually change. It was just a matter of how long it would take. Yang Qindong firmly believed that time could change a person. Oh, they've been staying in the room all this time? Yang Qindong's smile was written all over his face. He was not surprised by the two people's uncooperative attitude. Yes and no. At first they stayed in the room, but the 6th young master also knew that even in the room, the facilities inside were completely different from the Ming dynasty. In addition, after their relatives were safely sent back, they began to appear on the streets again. At first they did not speak much, but when I received the order to come to the capital, they had already made friends with many of the common people in the city. It could be seen that the smiles on their faces were getting more and more. This is a good phenomenon. When he heard this, Yang Qindong was already certain that these two people would definitely be used by him. The only difference was the length of time. Everything caused by little Liuli was developing steadily. This was where Yang Qindong's confidence came from. There was no need to talk about advancing. If there were any accidents, he would have a place to retreat. So what did he not dare to do? Next, he had to consider how to make a good wall as offense. Should he let the Tumu fortress incident continue? Yang Qindong knew that the Ming dynasty's elites were all lost in the Tumu fortress incident. From then on, the Ming dynasty began to weaken. But even so, under the efforts of many people, it still persisted for a very long time. But in the end, the Ming dynasty was defeated in the end. It was defeated because of internal strife. If not for the fact that the power was too scattered, the aristocrats, scholars, and eunuchs were holding each other back, and sometimes they could not even carry out the emperor's orders, how could there be the possibility of the Manchurian Tatars entering the pass? And how could there be the scene of the magnificent China being bullied and humiliated 300 years later? Originally, he had been considering whether he should take action to change history. However, when he thought of the actions of the Ming dynasty's monarch and the tragic history in the future, he shook his head and completely gave up on this idea. Forget it, if there were no elites, then so be it. The deaths of a few people in exchange for a happy life for more people. Especially since China was able to stand at the top of the world, it was appropriate no matter how one looked at it. Young Master Eunuch Mao sent word that Eunuch Wangzhen sent word that His Majesty is going to the Immortal abode. He asked for you to make arrangements in advance. Tiger's Mane appeared in the study and reported the news he'd just received. All right, I understand. Yang Qindong's expression froze for a moment. Then a sharp glint appeared in his eyes. It was about time. This Wangzhen was going to make a move to dissuade Zhou Xian. Immortal abode. Yang Qindong's sudden arrival caused Mu Lily, who was on duty, to be extremely nervous. Yang Xi's matter had obviously been suppressed by Dong Shuai. Now every time she returned to the Yang clan manor she could see Yang Xi. The two of them were gradually warming up. They were just waiting for the right opportunity to get married. All of this was thanks to Yang Qindong. When she saw Dong Shuai enter the Immortal abode, Mu Lily hurried over to greet him. She said respectfully, "Sixth young master, why have you come? I need to receive an important guest. How about this? Immediately prepare the best private room and arrange for some quick-witted and nimble attendants to serve him." Yang Qindong nodded at Mu Lily with a smile. Then he turned to Tiger's Mane and gave him a light nod, indicating for him to check the surroundings. Regardless of whether or not the emperor would bring guards with him, if something really did happen he would still be in a lot of trouble. Tiger's Mane led Mu Lily up to the third floor with a group of people. They entered the private room and carefully inspected it. After confirming that there were no problems, they went downstairs. What they saw was a young man dressed like a noble young master, escorted by a group of people, arriving at the Immortal abode's entrance. "Young master, you've come." Yang Qindong smiled as he walked over to greet him. When he saw Zhou Xian, who was dressed like a noble young master, he didn't kneel. Zhou Xian was dressed casually. He obviously didn't want others to know his identity. He didn't feel the slightest bit of displeasure at Yang Qindong's refusal to kneel. On the contrary, he nodded happily. Wangzhen, who was also dressed casually, asked in a low voice, "Sixth young master, has everything been arranged?" "It's been arranged. The best private room on the third floor. Please." Yang Qindong nodded lightly, indicating that everything was ready. He turned around and led the way up the stairs to the third floor. In order to protect the privacy of their guests, the Immortal abode had even covered the two sides of the stairs with red cloth. This way only the owner would know who the guests were and no one else would know. This was exactly what Zhou Xian wanted, and he boldly made his way to the third floor. In the private room, Zhou Xian sat on the east side, while Wangzhen carefully waited on him. Yang Qindong left after asking what the emperor wanted to eat and what songs and dances he wanted to perform on the first floor. With his current status, it wasn't appropriate for him to appear in this kind of setting. If he insisted on appearing, the difference in status would only make him feel awkward. Now that there was no one else in the private room, Wangzhen took the opportunity to voice his opinion, urging Zhou Xian to personally lead the troops. "Your Majesty, you are young and promising and your heroic bearing is flourishing. Today the great Ming dynasty is prosperous and the people live a prosperous life. All of this is inextricably linked to your wise leadership." Wangzhen smiled as he praised Zhou Xian. Naturally, everyone was willing to listen to flattery, and Zhou Xian was no exception. Even though he heard nothing but flattery every day, it didn't stop him from continuing to listen. "Teacher, our country's stability is due to the efforts of my subjects as well as your contributions." Zhou Xian drank the fine wine and ate the piping hot delicacies that had just been served. Through the transparent glass he watched the lively singing and dancing on the first floor. He watched the singers wearing the miniskirts that Yang Qindong had suggested, singing and dancing. It was truly a joyous sight. Zhou Xian knew that the costumes of these dancers had received a lot of criticism when they first appeared. There were even some who sent him memorials about it, causing quite a stir. In the end, Wang Zhen took the initiative to resolve this issue. He insisted that this was all a commercial activity, and that it was to serve the public. It was a delicacy in the eyes of many. In fact, this kind of event had attracted countless so-called gentlemen to watch. Many of them cursed the spider lilies while enjoying the benefits. It really was the type of person who enjoyed pain and pleasure at the same time. Now that Zhou Xian was in such a good mood, Wang Zhen felt that coming to the Immortal abode to discuss this matter was the correct decision. At the same time, he said what he wanted to say. Your Majesty, your ability to rule the world has already reached the peak. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that no one will be able to do it in the future, but at the very least no one has done it before. However, in the end you are still lacking by a little bit. Everyone says that true experts conquer the world on horseback and rule the world from horseback. You still lack the ability to personally lead an imperial army and cut through all obstacles on the battlefield. If you can accomplish this, I can imagine that the title of the #1 sage monarch in history would belong to none other than your Majesty. Personally lead an imperial army? Zhou Xian had never thought about this before, so Wang Zhen's words piqued his interest. Zhou Xian was only 22 years old. He was young, energetic, and full of vigor. At the same time, he had the same impulsiveness and desire for success as other young people. Originally, he hadn't thought about personally leading an imperial army, and had even been worried about who to send to lead the troops. However, when he heard that he could personally lead the troops, it was as if a door had been opened in his mind. It was like a bright light had suddenly appeared in the darkness, illuminating the path ahead. Yes, you will personally lead an imperial army. Wang Zhen, who had been paying attention to Zhou Xian, noticed that the emperor didn't have the slightest bit of reluctance. On the contrary, he had an expression of eagerness. He immediately knew that there was hope, so he continued to advocate. Think about Han Dynasty's Emperor Gaozu Liu Bang, who was the first emperor to lead an imperial army and unite the world. Liu Yu personally led many expeditions to the north, establishing the Liu Song. Tang Taizong Li Shimin personally led an expedition to Goguryeo. There was also Emperor Qing, who led 3 expeditions to Mongolia, forcing them to surrender. However, when they heard the name of Emperor Qing, they trembled in fear. Right now, your Majesty is still young and we have millions of mighty soldiers. Facing a small walla, we can easily win in a single battle. Moreover, the fame of our army will spread far and wide. Wherever we go, I'm afraid that the enemy will collapse without fighting. In the future, when people mention your Majesty's name, I'm sure that they will also tremble in fear, not daring to offend the Ming dynasty in the slightest. In this way, your Majesty will definitely be recorded in the history books. It is also very possible for your Majesty to become an eternal emperor. Under Wang Zhen's description, Zhou Xian seemed to have already seen himself leading a mighty army into battle. Wherever he went, the enemy would tremble in fear and surrender at the sight of the wind. Weapons and armor would be thrown all over the ground, and there would be countless deserters and surrenders. Good. As if he was under the influence of self-hypnosis, Zhou Xian let out a series of cheers, followed by a hearty laugh. The emperor was so happy that Wang Zhen's face also revealed a somewhat abnormal luster. The military power that he had longed for a long time seemed to be within his reach. After this battle, he would return to the court victorious. At that time, even if the emperor wanted to touch him, he wouldn't be completely powerless to fight back. He could still live for a few more decades. At that time, what position would he be in? What kind of glory and achievements would he enjoy? Chapter 133. 2 people, a man and a hermaphrodite, were laughing loudly in the private room, as if they had encountered something extremely happy. Their laughter seemed to shake the entire private room. Yang Chendong, who had been waiting outside, carefully paid attention to the movements in the room. When the laughter came out without restraint, he guessed a possibility. He felt that the matter had been settled and it should be time for him to appear. He immediately waved his hand, and a waiter brought over a delicacy that had just been prepared. Taking this opportunity, he pushed the door open and entered. Yang Chendong's sudden entry did not affect the hearty laughter of the ruler and official. Wang Zhen even had the intention to show off to him. Chendong, quickly come and pay your respects to the wisest and greatest emperor in our history. The emperor is going to personally lead the troops to Walla. As he spoke, Wang Zhen gave Yang Chendong a look. Personally lead the troops. Yang Qindong appeared to be very surprised on the surface, but in his heart he thought that it was indeed so. If one did not seek death, one would not die. Zhou Xian was jumping into the fire pit himself. As a bystander, he was afraid that he would not be able to stop him. Yang Qindong's surprised look was seen by Zhou Xian. Does Minister Yang have a different opinion? Yang Qindong, what do you mean? Wang Zhen had given countless looks just now because he was afraid that Yang Qindong would get in the way. At this moment, in order to prevent the other party from speaking rudely, he even directly called out the official's name. From this, it could be seen that if Yang Qindong said something wrong, he would dare to let the Hu Ben soldiers outside rush in and throw him into the imperial prison. Feeling Wang Zhen's threat and the emperor's suspicion, how could Yang Qindong not know what to say? Personally lead the troops. This is really too good. Since ancient times, a famous emperor must be proficient in both the pen and the sword. Looking at our Ming dynasty now, the sea is peaceful and peaceful. Your Majesty has already seen results in governing the country through the use of the pen. If you personally go on an expedition, it can really be said that no one has ever done it before. Yang Qindong's praise was even similar to what Wang Zhen had said just now. Immediately, the two people in the room were overjoyed. When Wang Zhen saw that Yang Qindong was so tactful, he was very happy. He smiled and said, as the saying goes, great minds think alike. In the past I didn't believe it, but now I have no choice but to believe it. That's right, Mr. and Minister Yang have the same opinion. It seems that this time we must personally lead the troops to prove the might of our nation, ha. Zhou Xian also laughed in agreement. Not only could he make a name for himself, but he could also go out and have fun. This was a good opportunity to gain both fame and fortune. No matter how he looked at it, it was a good opportunity. However, at this time, Zhou Xian didn't even think about the possibility of losing the war. Perhaps in his eyes he had never regarded Walla as a great enemy. During the time of Emperor Qing, the strength of the nation was not as strong as it was now. They were still defeated by the Mongol Empire. Now, after decades of development, they really didn't see the slightest possibility of losing the war. This attitude attracted the praise of the emperor and Wang Zhen. Yang Qindong also pretended to have a flushed face and laughed at the side. However, as he laughed, he suddenly knelt on the ground and said with a very determined attitude, "Your Majesty, this subject has a request. I hope that Your Majesty will agree." What is it? Let's hear it. Zhou Xian was in a good mood at this time, so his attitude towards Yang Qindong was naturally very good. Even Wang Zhen, who was at the side, was prepared to help Yang Qindong. After all, the other party cooperated with him so much. Even if it was to return the favor, he still had to make a move when it was necessary. Under the attention of 4 people, Yang Qindong's heart was set. He knew that his request would definitely be approved. He immediately raised his head and cupped his hands and said, "Your Majesty, although this subject has a low position and is idle, I still consider myself a part of the great Ming Empire. Since Your Majesty is going to personally lead the army, this subject requests to accompany you. I also want to admire Your Majesty's heroic actions and the scene of your victory. When you return in triumph, this subject will definitely record everything and arrange it into a dance song to let the whole world know of Your Majesty's greatness and wisdom." There were also different levels of flattery. When Yang Qindong said this, it immediately scratched Zhou Xian's itch. He thought that victory indeed needed someone to record it. Although historians would record it, it was only words on paper. How could it be more intuitive and moving than a dance song? Immediately he was overjoyed and agreed, Good. Yang Xi's loyalty is commendable. We will allow him to play." Wang Zhen, who was at the side, was also very happy. Yang Qindong took the initiative to ask to accompany the emperor. Didn't this mean that he was also optimistic about this battle? As such, no words were more effective than action. At this time he looked at Yang Qindong with an increasingly happy gaze. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Yang Qindong hurriedly expressed his gratitude and then stood up with a happy expression. He had decided to personally lead the army. Zhou Xian couldn't wait for even a moment. It was as if victory was right in front of him, and if he was a step late, the merit would belong to someone else. He didn't watch the song and dance he ordered and didn't eat the delicious food he ordered. He hurriedly left the Immortal residence with Wang Zhen. After the emperor left, Yang Qindong also called Mu Lily, who was on duty, to return to the Yang family manor. Everyone who had received the news was currently waiting in the main hall of the manor, waiting for the sixth young master to call for a meeting. Not everyone was present at the meeting. Yang Qindong first met with Qiao Yin, Madame Shui, Madame Xiang, Dong Hanxiang, as well as the two foremen of the Immortal residence, Mu Lili and Chuina. In the main hall, Yang Qindong was extremely solemn and serious. The five women were also affected by the atmosphere, and their expressions became much more serious. Even Madame Shui, who used to throw flirtatious glances at Yang Qindong in the past, retracted her seductive gaze at this time. Madame Xiang was very beautiful. She had an elegant temperament, and her figure was also very voluptuous. According to the previous book, she was different from Madame Shui, who looked like Su Qing. She looked more like a young Guanjilin. With her big eyes and towering breasts, there were very few men who could control themselves after seeing her. However, Yang Qindong was one of those rare men. It wasn't that he wasn't moved, but rather that he hadn't been able to find the right opportunity. Madame Xiang's dance was beautiful, and her talent in this field was outstanding. There were many performances in the Immortal residence that required her to rehearse, so there wasn't enough time. With Qiao Yin and Madame Shui, Yang Qindong didn't insist on it. When it came to women, what he liked was the feeling of success when the conditions were right, and not the feeling of doing something in a hurry. In his opinion, that kind of combination would deprive him of a sense of beauty. It wasn't something he liked. This time he called the five women over. Yang Qindong didn't waste any time on pleasantries. He went straight to the point and mentioned that he was about to follow the emperor to the border. Upon hearing that there was going to be a war and that the sixth young master was going to personally take part, the five women couldn't help but show a hint of concern. In contrast, Mu Lili and Chuina were much more reserved, but Qiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang all had expressions of reluctance and concern. There were even tears in their eyes that seemed ready to pour down at any moment. Enough. Going to war with the emperor, the young master is a civil official, so he won't be in any danger. As for the rest of you, once I'm gone, I'm afraid that the capital will fall into chaos. You must not panic. If you encounter a situation where things can't be controlled, immediately retreat to the Yang clan manor. I will arrange for people to protect you here. Yang Qindong's face was brimming with confidence when it came to his own safety, but he truly couldn't be at ease when it came to these women. All of them were heavenly beauties. Once the capital fell into chaos, who knew if some of them would be tempted by lust and take risks? For the sake of their safety, Yang Qindong had intentionally left Dao Zhao's group of 10 and the Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad in the Yang clan manor. Yang Si, Yang Lu and Yang San of the Security Bureau had been left in the capital, so there shouldn't be any problems. But he was still worried that these women wouldn't be willing to abandon the Immortal abode in the face of danger, which was why he had called them to this meeting. He had only one goal in mind. In times of danger, everyone in the Immortal abode had to retreat to the manor. As for whether or not the Immortal abode would be plundered by others, he couldn't care less. It was impossible to take care of everything in the first place. Since he had intentionally warned them about this, he believed that the girls would not panic too much if something were to happen. Young master, didn't you say that there wouldn't be any danger? Why did you make such an arrangement? Qiao Yin had followed Yang Qindong for a long time, and she was the woman who understood him the best. She had been to Crimson City before and she was well aware of just how powerful that place was. Even with such tyrannical strength, Yang Qindong had still made such an order. Qiao Yin couldn't help but think about it. There's always a what-if in everything. Aren't I just preparing for the worst? Huh. Yang Qindong winked at Qiao Yin, his eyes gleaming. Qiao Yin's mental defenses crumbled and she didn't say anything else. He quickly made appropriate arrangements for the women. After they left, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei Yang Wu, 1st Battalion Commander Xiao Feng, 1st Squad Commander Qiu Vi, 2nd Squad Commander Dao Xiao, Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad Commander Bai Zua, and the others stood in the main hall. None of them sat down. They all had solemn expressions as they waited for Yang Qindong to give them orders. Very good. You don't panic in the face of trouble. This is a necessary quality for a leader. This young master hopes that you can remain as calm as you are now. Yang Qindong's gaze swept over everyone. Soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. You've all been in hiding for so long. Now it's time for you to show your prowess. Now I order. Everyone had gone through strict military training and formation training. As soon as the command was given, everyone tensed up their bodies, put their feet together and stood at attention. Satisfied with everyone's performance, Yang Chendong said, "I order." Chapter 134. Within the palace they were also nervously making preparations. Compared to the order in the Yang village, this place was much more chaotic. Zhou Xian was afraid that a long delay would lead to trouble, and that the ministers would oppose him when they heard the news. Zhou Xian privately ordered Wang Zhen to make full preparations before the war, striving to set out as early as possible. He was already eager to go out and show off. Naturally, this was also what Wang Zhen wanted. Whether or not he could seize military power would depend on his performance this time. He called all his disciples and grand disciples over. More than half of the eunuchs began to move. They mobilized troops and issued orders. They were extremely busy. Wang Zhen, who did not know anything about military matters, did not have enough understanding of Walla's attacks. He thought that by letting Ying Zong personally lead the troops, he would be able to scare the Walla troops away. Hence, to win by luck, he decided to make Ying Zong personally lead the troops when the Ming dynasty was not fully prepared. He wanted Ying Zong to follow Song Zhenzong's example and leave a good name in history. Ying Zong usually listened to Wang Zhen. This time, when he heard Wang Zhen's words, he felt that this was a good chance for him to show off his skills. Hence, he did not discuss with the officials and made the decision. He also announced that they would set out in 2 days. The moment Ying Zong personally led the troops, all the officials were shocked. When the officials found out, they immediately used Minister of War Kuang Yi to say, "It is not good for the 6th master to go out." Minister of Personnel Wang Zhen led the officials to advise against it. Reports of the defeat at the Datong front lines continued to spread to the imperial capital. These military uniforms that annoyed people in the past were like soul-reaping messengers in Zhou Qian's eyes. Since he had already made his decision and was attracted by the results of the victory, Ying Zong totally trusted Wang Zhen and insisted on personally leading the troops. As for the advice of the officials, he did not care at all. Now that the emperor had given his imperial decree, after a series of useless remonstrations, the only thing that the officials could do was to be appointed by him. Since the emperor was personally leading the troops, the number of officials following him naturally could not be small. If not, wouldn't they become a joke? Regarding this point, Wang Zhen quickly made preparations. A total of 100 officials and civil servants were present. Similar to history, even the people following the emperor were the same. The only change was that Yu Qian, the left assistant minister of the Bureau of Military Personnel, was absent from the capital. Without this pillar of support at this crucial moment, there was a hint of uncertainty as to whether or not the defense of the capital would begin, how it would begin, and how it would end. In just a few days, all the soldiers in the capital had mobilized. 500,000 soldiers from the northern provinces had gathered in the capital, and under Zhou Qian's personal command, they were ready to leave the capital to reinforce Datong on the 2nd day. There was going to be a big battle, and the emperor was going to personally lead the troops. Regarding this, the common people naturally raised both hands in agreement. Since the establishment of the Ming dynasty, the people of the Ming dynasty had never experienced defeat in a foreign war. As such, they were very confident in their own army. Compared to the common people who did not know what was going on, some important officials had a different view. For example, in the home of the Minister of Rights, Hu Shao, he did not have a good opinion of the emperor going on an expedition. In the study of the Hu residence, Hu Shao and his eldest son Hu Zhongning were analyzing the situation of the battle. On the table was the battle report from the front lines. On it was written as follows. East, Tuochuo Buhua and Wulianya attacked Liaodong. West, other generals attacked Ganzhou, Xianxia of Gansu. The center was the focus of the attack and was split into 2. One was led by Alishuan and attacked Red City of the Xuanfu. The other was led by Yeshen and attacked Datong. Yeshen's attack on Datong was led by, his troops were very sharp. The Datong army lost and the castle outside the Great Wall was destroyed. Datong's general Wu Hao died in Mao'er village. The Ming dynasty's constable commandant Jing Yuan and the other 3 generals each led 10,000 men to defend against the enemy. Father Walla's army came prepared, but our army was in a hurry to fight. In this situation we should fight slowly. With the strength of the Ming dynasty we can slowly win. I really don't understand why the emperor wants to personally lead the troops. Isn't this too risky? Although Hu Zhongning was part of the embroidered uniform guard, he had good talent in military affairs. When he analyzed the situation, he hit the nail on the head. That's right. Very satisfied with his son's insight, Hu Chong nodded approvingly. However, his expression quickly became very helpless as he said, Minister Kwang of the Ministry of War, Minister Wang of the Ministry of Appointments, and other important officials all tried to persuade him, but the emperor did not listen. What can we do? Just as Hu Chong showed a helpless expression, Hu Yen rushed in from outside the study. Once she entered the study, before she could catch her breath, she said anxiously, Grandfather, father, did he go as well? Can we not let him go? Needless to say, everyone knew who she was referring to. Faced with this question, Hu Chong first nodded and then shook his head. Yang Shima is indeed on the list of people accompanying the emperor. However, I heard that he asked for it. Furthermore, the army is leaving tomorrow. Unless he asks for it himself and needs a good reason, no one can stop it. I'll go find him now. After Hu Yen heard this, her lips pressed together tightly and she turned to leave. Wait. Hu Zhongning suddenly called out to his daughter, Yen, you are still a girl after all. Not to mention that the Yang family has not given you a betrothal gift. Even if they did, it doesn't count until you are married. Why are you going now? Be good and stay at home. Father. Hearing that Hu Zhongning was stopping her from going, Hu Yan's face immediately became anxious. Although she was not married, her heart had long been tied to Yang Chendong. As if he knew what kind of personality his daughter had, after Hu Zhongning stopped her, he directly shouted outside the study, Is Lieutenant Sun Chuang here? Here. Sun Chuang, who was responsible for security outside the door, immediately responded. Watch the young Mississippi. Without my order, she is not allowed to leave the house. Hu Zhongning ordered loudly. When a man went to the battlefield, his head was tied to his belt. No one could guarantee that he would return safely. If there was a problem, his daughter would still have to marry. At this moment, he naturally had to keep his reputation intact. Hu Yan's matter was ultimately just a small episode. The next morning, on the 16th of July 1449 AD, Ingzong ordered his brother Zhu Qiyu to guard the capital. Zhu Qizhen and Wang Zhen gathered an army of 500,000 in a few days, randomly allocated some food and weapons and hurriedly set off. Along with Ingzong and Wang Zhen were Duke Ingzhang Fu, Minister of War Kuang Yi, Minister of Revenue Wang Zue, Cabinet Scholars Chao Nai, Zhang Yi, Crown Prince Yang Chendong, and more than 100 other civil and military officials. However, Ingzong did not allow them to participate in military and political affairs, leaving all military and political power to Wang Zhen alone. Due to the improper organization, all military and political affairs were arbitrarily decided by Wang Zhen. Duke Qingguo Zhuyong was a general, but in front of Wang Zhen he had to kneel. Minister of Revenue Wang Zue asked the emperor to return to the army, and Wang Zhen ordered him to kneel in the grass until the sky turned dark. The civil and military officials accompanying the expedition were not allowed to participate in military and political affairs, and the army was in chaos. Yang Chendong was also among the officials, and not only that, he even asked Wang Zhen for a position in the army. This was also a reward for Wang Zhen to thank Yang Chendong for taking the initiative to speak up for him in the Immortal abode. It was precisely because of this that the sixth young master was able to arrange for his own people to serve by his side. The so-called own people naturally referred to Tiger, Mane, Beta Persei, Yongwu, and Chiovi's first guard, as well as Xiaofeng's first company of cold-edge soldiers. As long as Yang Chendong didn't interfere, the outcome of this battle was obvious. Once they were surrounded by Walla's army, it would be very dangerous without sufficient strength to protect them. Yang Chendong had only just transferred the first company of cold-edge soldiers over, and it was also at this time that he began to bare his fangs. This was one of the benefits of joining the army. Although he didn't have any real authority, especially under Wang Zhen's leadership, he could still arrange for a few people to serve by his side. The chaos of the army also brought benefits to his arrangements. At the very least, no one cared or questioned him. Similarly, because the preparations for this expedition had been rushed and poorly organized, the army was in chaos not long after they set out. Before they even reached Datong, the army was already running low on food. People were dying one after another and corpses covered half the road. It had to be said that because the army had been assembled too hastily, the gathering of 500,000 soldiers had been extremely chaotic from the start. Just how chaotic was it? The Minister of War Kuang Yi had fallen off his horse due to the crowd. The Minister of War was the equivalent of the current Minister of Defense. Even he had fallen into chaos, so one could only imagine how poorly organized and disciplined the army was. How could such an army possibly win a battle? They didn't care about the situation of the enemy, nor did they discuss battle plans. They didn't even arrange for logistical support, treating this expedition like a child's game. Wang Zhen was in charge of all military affairs, and the accompanying civil and military officials didn't participate. This was simply an amateur commanding an expert. Yang Qindong didn't say anything about Wang Zhen's random orders. He knew that even if he wanted to say something, the other party probably wouldn't listen. Since that was the case, all they could do was wait and see what would happen as well as do what they could. For example, the Minister of Revenue Wang Zhuo wasn't young anymore. Seeing him kneel in the grass, Wang Zhuo had personally delivered a thick praying mat to him. The commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Ji Guang, had seen everything clearly and reported this matter to Wang Zhen. Wang Zhen was very busy and wanted to get involved in everything big or small so that everyone could do as he wished. When he heard the report that it was Yang Qindong's doing, he only frowned and waved his hand. Let him go. Record everything about him and we'll talk about it later. Of course, he wasn't letting him go out of the kindness of his heart. Wang Zhen wanted to record everything and interrogate Yang Qindong to see if he could extort more silver. Chapter 135. Yang Qindong walked up to Wang Zhuo and placed the thick prayer mat under the legs of the Minister of Revenue. This small action caused tears to well up in the eyes of this 65-year-old man. This small action was not to be underestimated, but none of the other officials would dare to do it. They didn't even have the ability to protect themselves, much less help others. Yang Qindong, it's not worth it for you to do this. Wang Zhen will definitely hold a grudge against you. Once he returns to the court, he'll probably settle everything, Wang Zhuo kindly reminded Yang Qindong. It's fine. Respecting the old and loving the young is one of the virtues. Even if someone tries to blame me, I'll just explain myself to him. Yang Qindong nonchalantly smiled. But in his heart he was thinking, will Wang Zhen return to the court? Hearing Yang Qindong talk about virtues, Wang Zhuo's tears flowed down his face. He was so moved that he didn't know what to say. Seeing that the old man was crying like a child, Yang Qindong squatted down, took out a handkerchief and handed it over. Lord Wang, you still have to take care of your body. It's very windy outside. Quickly dry your tears. It won't be good if you get an eye disease again. Hey. Thank you, Yang Qindong. Wang Zhuo took the handkerchief and wiped his eyes, his heart filled with gratitude. It was said that a friend in need was a friend indeed. Yang Qindong had barely left the capital, but he had already begun to win over the hearts of his people. And this was only the beginning. It could only be described as the first meeting of a towering figure. The army left Jiong Pass on the 19th and arrived at the Xian Manor. On the 28th, they arrived at the southern part of Yanghe City. It could be said that the army moved very quickly. Yanghe City was one of the 72 castles of Datong in the Ming dynasty. It was 4,600 meters long, and the city walls were 11.6 meters high. There was also a trench that was 10 meters deep. There was a barbican built inside and outside the city gate, which was the ancient battlefield where Liu Bang was besieged by Baideng. During the Yuan dynasty it was called Baideng County. 10 days before Ing Zong's army arrived, on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Ming army engaged in an intense battle with Yeshen. A total of 40,000 Ming soldiers were defeated by the Walla army. Even Datong provincial governor Song Ying, prince consort Jing Yuan, and Zhu Mian all died in battle. From this one could see the heavy casualties. When the Ying Sec's army arrived, the battlefield had not been cleaned up yet. Corpses of the Ming dynasty's army were strewn all over, and there was an unpleasant smell and a fearful atmosphere. This dealt a heavy blow to the Ming dynasty's army, and some of the more cowardly ones started to desert. Ing Zong continued to advance. He wanted to find Walla's main force for a decisive battle, but at this time, Yeshen withdrew his forces and retreated beyond the Great Wall. 8th month, first day, the Ming army entered the strategic city of Datong, wanting to reach a standstill with the Walla army, who knew that Xian did not choose to fight head-on. Instead, he retreated north to lure the Ming army in. Although Datong was a strategic city, it was unable to support such a huge logistical supply. Seeing that the chances of a decisive battle were slim and the army continued to stay here, not only would it not be of any use, but they would also suffer heavy losses every day. Thus, the officials all suggested to move back to the court. Yang Chendong did not follow the officials to ask the emperor. Instead, he looked on coldly from the side. Just from the situation at that time, the decision to move back to the court was the right one. Although they had mobilized so many people and did not achieve anything, at least the army did not suffer any heavy losses. At this moment, not only did Yang Chendong see this point, but even Zhou Xian and Wang Zhen, the actual commander of the army, also saw this point. The Battle of Datong had started under Wang Zhen's instructions. He had sent Datong's General Song Ying and military governor Shi Heng to fight with Walla. In his mind, the two of them were more than enough to take care of them first. This way, when he arrived, he could put on a show and show off. There was no need to really fight. Speaking of which, if they really fought, Wang Zhen might not have the guts to do so. Wang Zhen was worried that Song Ying and Shi Heng would not go all out, so he arranged for his trusted eunuch Guijing to be the army supervisor. Under the urging of this eunuch, the two sides fought. Due to their eagerness to fight, they fell into Xian's ambush. Furthermore, because of Guijing, a portion of Song Ying's army was wiped out. Shi Heng and Guijing escaped and talked about how strong Walla was, which scared Wang Zhen. Since the civil and military officials were all trying to persuade him to retreat, he chose to follow the wishes of everyone and agreed. Since they decided to retreat, they were not far from Datong, so there would not be any danger. They could just treat it as a vacation for 500,000 people. On the third day of the 8th month, the Ming army decided to retreat. Datong Deputy General Guodeng suggested that they retreat from Zijing Pass to Beijing. This would be far away from Walla's possible attack route and would be relatively safe. However, Wang Zhen once again stood out and gave a different suggestion. For Wang Zhen to have his current position, it was because of his opportunistic nature. However, it was because of this that he acted like a small person and was used to showing off wherever he went. Now that he knew how strong the Walla cavalry was, he knew that he could not fight. However, if he went back just like that, he would feel some regret. As such, he decided to satisfy his desire to show off. He suggested not returning to Datong but to Xianxia Yuzhou, Wang Zhen's hometown. He wanted to use this chance to show off. When he left Xianxia Yuzhou, Wang Zhen was still a poor man. Now that he had unlimited power, he wanted to return to his hometown and show off. Due to Wang Zhen's insistence and the fact that Zhou Xian agreed, the army could only head toward Xianxia Yuzhou. However, just as they were about to reach Yuzhou and were 40 miles away from Zijing Pass, Wang Zhen suddenly changed his mind and asked everyone to stop. The reason was that he was afraid that the army would trample on the crops in Yuzhou. Before the new year, he had obtained large amounts of potato seeds from the Yangjia village and Ministry of Revenue and planted them here. To protect these high-yielding crops, the army could not advance. This reason once again convinced Zhou Xian, and the army headed toward the Xian manor. Regarding this, Yang Chendong still maintained his silence. At this moment, even if he tried to persuade them, what could he do? With his current identity and position, his words would not be accepted by Wang Zhen and Ying Zong. If he rashly suggested it, it would only draw their disgust. As the Ming dynasty army headed toward the Xian manor, Xian, who had been following behind, also started to have thoughts. Xian's main force of cavalry was only around 30,000 people. Facing the Ming dynasty's main force of 500,000, he did not have confidence in winning in one battle. After following the Ming dynasty army for over 10 days and seeing the Ming dynasty army twist and turn around like a dumb bug, his heart slowly filled with confidence. It seemed like these 500,000 people were not strong and would not be able to take a single blow. As such, he gave the order to attack. Walla's elite cavalry split into two groups and attacked the Ming dynasty army. When Wang Zhen heard the news, he was very nervous and quickly retracted his army. He also sent Marquis Gongshan Wu Kezhong and Governor Wu Keqin to lead troops to resist the battle. In the end, they were defeated. Wu Kezhong's troops acted as the Ming dynasty's rear guard and had more than 10,000 people, but they were still unable to take a single blow. After the defeat, he sent Duke Qing Zhuyong and Duke Yongshan Shuesher to lead 40,000 troops to Yaoer Ridge to fight with Xian. In the end they were ambushed and completely wiped out. The troops that Zhu Yong led were the elites of the Ming dynasty and they were mainly cavalry. After this force was wiped out, the Ming dynasty army had already lost the ability to fight with Yeshen. At the same time their morale had also started to fall. Just like that, the day before the Ming dynasty army arrived at the Tumu castle, they had already suffered heavy losses. They lost around 50,000 men and their actual military strength, not including the transport troops and civilian workers, was less than 200,000. Furthermore, they had lost their elite cavalry. When Zhu Yong led 30,000 men into Yeshen's ambush and did not return, Zhu Xian and Wang Zhen were so scared that they peed their pants and ran back. On the 13th day of the 8th month, the army entered the Tumu castle. When the army arrived at the Tumu castle, the sky was not dark and the sun had not set. At this moment they were only 20 miles away from Huailai County, and they could rush there in a short time. The moment the army entered the county, the Walla cavalry would not be able to do anything. At this moment, it could be said that it was a matter of life and death. Wang Zhen was up to no good and he ordered the army to stop advancing. It turned out that the 1,000-odd carriages that belonged to Wang Zhen had not arrived. These were the things that the border troops had given him along the way and they were worth millions of silver. As the person in charge of this north expedition, the gifts from the local official Zhuang Xing were naturally accepted by Wang Zhen. The gifts from the officials along the way were too generous, which was why Wang Zhen gave up on the chance to enter Huailai city. Wang Zhen requested for everyone to wait for the carriages to arrive before they left. Hence, at the Tumu castle, Zhu Xian, hundreds of officials and hundreds of thousands of troops waited foolishly for an entire night. When the sun rose, the 1,000-odd carriages still had not arrived. Wang Zhen could not wait any longer. In his heart he knew that the carriages would not arrive and at this moment he wanted to leave. Unfortunately, even if he wanted to leave it was already too late. With a night's time the 30,000 Walla elite cavalry had split up and surrounded the Ming army. In the end the hundreds of thousands of troops were surrounded by the 20,000 Walla cavalry in the Tumu castle, which had no water source. To say that 30,000 troops surrounded hundreds of thousands of troops was impossible under normal circumstances. However, after these few days, the army was like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Their morale was all gone and they had lost half of their original combat strength. Wang Zhen was also frightened by the charging Walla cavalry. In his panic he used the Tumu castle as the center to dig trenches and set up barriers to protect himself. Unfortunately, Wang Zhen did not know how to fight and he did not even understand the geography of the place. The Tumu castle was located on high ground and there was no water source, so it was not a place that could be defended. Hence, in the following days, the hundreds of thousands of Ming troops were surrounded by Yeshen for a full 2 days and 3 nights, and the lack of water became more and more serious. The Ming army dug 3 feet into the ground, but they could not find a single drop of water. Their morale was all gone and their thoughts changed. 8th month, 15th day, Yeshen suddenly withdrew his troops. He said that he was not going to fight, and he even sent a messenger over to say that he wanted to negotiate. This was just him playing hard to get. Chapter 136. However, Wang Zhen believed it. Perhaps he was lying to himself. When he saw that Yeshen had retreated first, he immediately gave the order to go out and find a water source. With this order, the soldiers removed the encirclement, jumped out of the trench and ran with all their might towards a small river 15 li away. The troops were instantly thrown into chaos. Looking from afar one could only see a dense mass of black. However, after running for 3 to 4 li, tens of thousands of Walla elite cavalry suddenly appeared and charged into the chaos of the Ming dynasty army. When the soldiers reached 10,000 there was no end. When the soldiers reached 100,000 there was no end. The Walla army besieged the Ming dynasty army from all sides. The cavalry rushed in and waved their swords to kill the Ming dynasty army. The Ming dynasty army suffered heavy casualties. Wherever the cavalry swords passed, heads flew high into the air. At the same time, blood splattered everywhere. At the same time they shouted, "Those who throw swords will not be killed." In times of crisis, we could see the shamelessness of the Ming dynasty officials. The Walla army's slogan was, "Those who throw swords will not be killed." As long as they threw away their armor and weapons it was fine. However, in order to save their lives, these officials actually took off everything and trampled on each other naked. The number of people trampled to death by their own people was more than the number of people killed by the Walla army. At that time, the Walla army was already not in formation and did not have the heart to kill the enemy. This was because they were busy getting rich, specifically picking up gold, silver, jewels and valuables to rob. At that time, if there were one or two strong generals who stood up and shouted, they might have been able to reverse the situation. During the Three Kingdoms period, Cao Cao did this. Qin Xiong also did this under Zhang Xutuo and Li Mi. Unfortunately, Wang Zhen was not Cao Cao. The Ming dynasty generals did not have Qin Xiong or Qin Shubao. Everyone was busy taking off their clothes to save their lives. After taking off their clothes, the miserable state they were in became the laughingstock of history. Looking at Ing Zong, this fellow, he did not even dismount from his horse. Instead, under the tight protection of the embroidered uniform guards, he broke out of the encirclement and escaped. It was a pity that everyone was busy taking off their clothes at that time, so there was no one to support him. The embroidered uniform guard failed to break through the encirclement, and in the end, Zhu Qizhen became a lone boat on the sea, drifting under the protection of General Fan Zhong. If not for Yang Qindong's appearance, he would have been like a little chick, dragged to the north by the Walla army. Ever since he had left the capital, Yang Qindong had acted like a spectator, observing everything that was happening around him. The Ming dynasty army suffered defeat after defeat, and wrong orders were given out by Wang Zhen. Zhu Qizhen was like a puppet, only knowing how to nod his head in agreement and unable to debate. Yang Qindong looked on coldly from the side. This was a close understanding of ancient warfare, as well as a close observation of the Ming dynasty's military power. Even if some of the orders were wrong and were opposed by the officials, Zhu Qizhen agreed and Wang Zhen carried them out. Even if Yang Qindong wanted to change anything, he could not do it. He could only watch as the army was surrounded and broken down, and in the end the entire battle was a complete failure. In this, Yang Qindong was limited in what he could do. In the face of Wang Zhen, who had actual military power over hundreds of thousands of soldiers, unless he could hold Wang Zhen hostage, it was impossible for him to have any control over the war. Everything continued until the balance of the war was completely one-sided. The final moment had finally arrived. The Battle of Tumu could be considered a farce. There was no cavalry charging, no generals bravely killing the enemy, no decisive battle between large armies, and no spectacular sight of the firearms of the three major battalions opening fire on all fronts. The timing of Walla's attack was when the Ming dynasty's camp loosened up and moved to fetch water. Whether they fell for Yeshin's trick or the Ming dynasty took the initiative to fetch water, it was no longer important. Young master, it's a mess, it's all a mess. Hu Mang's eyes were filled with vigilance as he scanned his surroundings. The Type 54 gun hidden under his sleeves was already loaded and the safety was off. Whenever he discovered anyone trying to approach or threaten the young master, he would not hesitate to open fire and kill the enemy. Sigh. A sigh came from Yang Qindong's mouth. This sigh was for the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Ming dynasty. This sigh was for the decline of the Ming dynasty. This sigh was also for the sake of ending the chaos in front of him. Pass down the order, follow the first set of plans. Yang Qindong's eyes were still cold, but if one looked carefully, there was a trace of liveliness and hope. After the order was given, the hundreds of people who had been wandering around began to move. Compared to the people around them who were in a complete mess and were even undressing, they were dressed in good clothes and moved quickly, each according to the previous plan. Wang Zhen, this eunuch who only knew how to seize power and money, was like a headless fly at this moment. His eyes were constantly looking up and down, looking for a way to survive. For him, the defeat of the army was not terrible. As long as he could survive, everything would be fine. It would not be long before he could reorganize a new army and go to the battlefield. Of course, he might have the ability to do so, but whether or not he had the courage was another matter. His 4 eyes were still blinking rapidly when suddenly, someone flashed past his side. In a chaotic army, this kind of scene was too common. The soldiers did not know their generals and the generals did not know their soldiers. They were completely like headless flies running around. However, just as a figure flashed past him, Wang Zhen felt a sharp pain in his neck. Instinctively, he stretched out his hand to touch it. Blood spurted out uncontrollably into his hand, and the hot sensation caused his eyes to widen rapidly. Soon after he started to scream. Save me, someone killed me. Wang Zhen was still conscious at this moment. He knew that at this moment someone had done something to him. But in a chaotic battlefield, death was a very common thing. Even if he was the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, even if he was the most favored by Emperor Ying, no one was paying attention to him at this moment. One of his hands covered his neck that had been cut, as if he wanted to block the bleeding wound. The other hand was raised high and constantly waved, as if he wanted to use this to attract people's attention. He maintained this posture for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. After about 7 to 8 breaths of time he fell to his knees with a plop. Then his eyes turned gray and his face showed an extremely strong expression of unwillingness. He was unwilling. He clearly had great power, so why did he fall to the ground? He was unwilling. The emperor had trusted him so much and there was still a great future waiting for him. He was unwilling to accept the fact that he had died in such a dubious manner. Even when he died he did not even know who had killed him. He was unwilling, but he was indeed dead. Wang Zhen was dead. Dying in a chaotic battlefield, no one would pay attention to him. Even if someone saw him they would probably want to step on him to vent their anger. Compared to Wang Zhen, who died at the hands of Leng Feng, Minister of Revenue Wang Zhou and Minister of War Kuang Yi were saved by Leng Feng. Tiger's Man and Xiao Feng respectively saved the two ministers and rushed to Yang Qindong's side. In comparison, Kuang Ye's clothes were not bad and his appearance was not bad. No matter what, he was still the Minister of War, so he should have some integrity. However, the buttons on his shirt that he remembered wrongly showed that when Walla's army said, "Remove your armor and don't kill those who throw blades," he was also flustered. Speaking of which, who was not afraid of death? When faced with death, it was not wrong for a person to react in any way. At least it could not be said to be wrong because it often replaced a person's instinct and nature. Kuang Yi only remembered a few buttons wrongly. Compared to Wang Zhou, he was indeed much better. This was because our Minister of Revenue had already taken off his robes and was only wearing underwear. Moreover, it was wrinkled and didn't fit him at all. At a glance, one could tell that it was the kind of clothes that he had snatched from somewhere and put on temporarily. Yang Qindong was not surprised at all by Wang Zhu's reaction. As a scholar he should have integrity. However, in a chaotic battlefield he would be affected by others and completely lose his mind. It was reasonable for him to do things that he would not have dared to do before. When the two ministers were brought in front of Yang Qindong, their faces naturally turned red. They felt ashamed of their current behavior, but this feeling quickly disappeared and was replaced by curiosity. They were curious as to why in such a chaotic situation, this crown prince who was only a 5th-rank official did not panic. Not only that, there were 10 to 20 strong men standing beside him. Compared to the panic of the other soldiers, these people stood up straight and their expressions were extremely serious. Their eyes were like poles as they scanned the surroundings. Their vigilance was clearly telling others not to casually walk into this place. Otherwise, the consequences would be very serious. The two ministers were surprised and many questions popped up in their minds. Then another group of people came from afar. Their approach made the two of them nervous again. "Don't worry, they are on the same side." Noticing the two ministers' reaction, Yang Qindong said softly. This was like the warm sunlight in the winter, instantly relaxing their minds. The people who came from afar were the Leng Feng of the Yang clan's new army. Under their protection, the Right Assistant Minister Ding Xian of the Ministry of Justice, the Right Assistant Minister Wang Yonghe of the Ministry of Works, the Left Assistant Minister Yang Shan of the Ministry of Rights, the Right Assistant Minister Deng Li of the Imperial Censorate, the Assistant Minister Huang Yangjing of the Taichung Temple, the Assistant Minister Lu Rong of the Taichung Temple, and the Assistant Minister Ling Zhu of the Shangbao Temple were brought in front of Yang Qindong. Seeing the 7 people walking over, Yang Qindong's gaze carried a trace of doubt as he asked the Leng Feng, "Just these?" "It's just that some of them are still in good condition. The others have trampled on each other to death. Some of them have already been stripped clean and it's hard to tell who is who." The platoon leader of the Leng Feng platoon stood at attention and said. Chapter 137. Well, my ability is limited. Being able to save these people is already very good. Scope. Everyone pack up and let's go find the emperor. Yang Qindong's chin gently moved. Although the first plan was to save 30 officials or marquis, the battlefield was originally ever-changing. No one could take care of everything. It was not easy to save a total of 9 people. At this time the 9 Darren all noticed that something was wrong with Yang Qindong. This horse washer seemed to be calmer than anyone else. He even seemed to have a small number of elite armed forces with good fighting strength. But to be able to reach this position, which one of them was not a shrewd person? At this time no one would open their mouth to ask why. If they were unhappy, the other party would just casually abandon them. Other than waiting for death, they did not know what to do. No one raised an objection. Yang Qindong led everyone to the place where the emperor was. Originally, everyone was with the emperor, but when the war started, the whole situation became chaotic. Fortunately, Yang Qindong had already arranged for people to keep an eye on the emperor's every move. As someone who had foreseen all of this would happen, how could he abandon Zhou Xian, this important big shot, at such a critical time? Compared to the chaos on the battlefield where people were stripping off their armor and running away without resisting, the place where Zhou Xian was standing was very tragic. The performance of Hubin and the accompanying little eunuchs was probably the only bright spot in the whole change of the Timu castle. They were shot into hedgehogs by the tiles, but they still fought to the death without retreating. Their purpose was to protect Emperor Zhou Xian, who was trembling in fear and had yellow water dripping from his trousers. Yes, at this time, Zhou Xian had completely lost the majesty of the emperor. His golden armor had long been thrown away. At this time he was wearing an inner robe and was curled up in a corner, trembling. Later history books had recorded that even when Zhou Xian was captured by Walla's army, he was so calm, so brave, and even had a face of justice. He even dared to scold the enemy. But in fact that was not the case. This was just a trick that Emperor Yingzong used to beautify himself after he became the emperor again. Only Yang Ming's The Orthodox Northern Hunting Story praised Zhou Xian as a flower. In fact, the records in Lin Rong records and Bu Tai records were completely different. Just like Lu Dingji's record of negation of Taishang, we can see 3 things from the Timu Castle incident. First, Wang Zhen was indeed the culprit behind the Timu Castle incident. Second, Zhou Xian was not calm at all. Third, the officials were very shameless and the imperial guards, Hubin, were very loyal. When Yang Qindong and the 9 ministers arrived, they saw a group of Walla cavalry fighting against Hu Ben and the eunuchs. However, relatively speaking, the ones who were killed were the little eunuchs. By the time he arrived with everyone, all the eunuchs were dead and not a single one was left. Only the general of the guards, Fan Zhong, and a dozen or so Hu Ben who were seriously injured, were still resisting with all their might. Even though they were still far away, everyone could see that even their emperor would be captured by the Walla cavalry if they stayed any longer. The 9 ministers and all the new soldiers of the Yang family all looked at Yang Qindong. At this moment he had undoubtedly become the backbone of everyone. Everyone's hopes were placed on him. Charge over, open a bloody path. Anyone who resists, kill. His face was indifferent and his words fell from his mouth. If someone did not know, they would think that he was a general who had the overall situation under control. In fact, they only had 100 people, but the Walla cavalry had at least 300 people. The 9 ministers looked at Yang Qindong with suspicious eyes. They really could not understand what this horse-washing master was relying on at this moment. In contrast, the 100 soldiers were eager to give it a try. Speaking of which, these people had all been baptized by war. Some had participated in the war of Deng Maoqi's uprising, and also participated in the Battle of Ryukyu Island. Speaking of which, if these people did not have outstanding strength and outstanding performance, they would not have become soldiers of the 1st Company of the 1st Battalion. Most of the time the 1st Battalion represented the strongest. But no matter how many battles they had participated in, how many victories they had won, it could not compare to this time. This was in front of the 6th young master. Perhaps many of the soldiers would not have such an opportunity in their lives. But now the opportunity was in front of them. Who would not want to perform well? At this time the role of the commander of the 1st Battalion, Xiao Feng, suddenly appeared. As an officer and the current leader of the army, after hearing Yang Qindong's order, he said without the slightest hesitation, "The 1st platoon is responsible for the left wing, the 2nd platoon is responsible for the right wing, the 3rd platoon is responsible for the 8th platoon, the 9th platoon is responsible for the safety of everyone, and the 10th platoon is responsible for the rear." After the order was given, the 100 soldiers of the 1st Battalion quickly moved. Some went to the left, some went to the right, and some rushed to the front of Yang Chendong and the others. In less than 10 breaths, everyone was in position. Their speed and agility opened the eyes of the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was in the crowd. He had lived for decades, and most of the time he was in communication with the branch. He could not be more clear about the execution and mobility of the great Ming dynasty's army. It was precisely because of this that he could see the horror of this army that jumped out of nowhere. Not to mention other things, just their mobility alone was inferior to the great Ming dynasty's army that he had seen. Even the elite army when Emperor Qing was still alive would not have such a performance. They were able to be orderly in times of danger without the slightest trace of disorder. While the ministers were dazzled, the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion completed the distribution of the battle formation. Then after Xiao Feng said the word advance, the army began to attack forward. Step by step they were very steady. The eyes of the 100 soldiers also lit up and they were full of courage. Before everyone could see what was going on, a black firearm that no one had seen before appeared in the hands of the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion. As soon as the firearm was taken out, these people seemed to have become one with it, giving people the feeling that this thing originally existed. The 100 soldiers moved forward in an orderly pace, narrowing the distance between them and the emperor step by step. The sudden appearance of this army naturally attracted the attention of the Walla cavalry not far away. The general who was in charge of commanding the battle saw that the great Ming dynasty's army was in chaos. Many of them were trampling on each other, many of them were running away, and some of them were surrendering. However, there was still an army that took the initiative to approach them. He was instantly infuriated. Still riding on the strong horse, the general did not put the 100 or so soldiers in front of him in his eyes. It was just a charge that could completely defeat them, so it did not arouse his interest. You go and kill those reckless people for me. Don't let them live, kill them all. General Walla felt that his dignity had been provoked. He must give these people a heavy blow and let others who still dared to resist see the consequences of disobeying them. Kill. 50 to 60 Vala cavalrymen, dressed in the clothes of the Vala clan, were yelling and shouting as they charged towards Yang Chendong. In the eyes of the cavalry as they charged, they would soon wipe out all the enemies like a gust of wind sweeping away fallen leaves. Although the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty held a black firearm in their hands, they had seen such a battle formation before. The 3 firearm battalions of the Great Ming Dynasty's army, which had a total of 15,000 people, did not pose a threat to them. Didn't they all throw away their weapons and armor when the army charged? Be careful, the Walla cavalry is very brave and fierce. When the ministers saw the cavalry charging toward them, their bodies trembled and their voices trembled slightly. Compared to the ministers' fearful expressions, the 100 or so soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty did not take their eyes off the enemy. They all raised the firearms in their hands and according to their usual training, they stood in formation and aimed at the corresponding cavalry. At this moment, all the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion adjusted the rhythm of their breathing and waited for Xiao Feng's order to shoot. 200 steps, 150 steps, 100 steps. As the commander Xiao Feng calmly looked at everything in front of him. He did not show any abnormal reaction because of the charge of the enemy cavalry. When he estimated that the enemy was 100 steps away, he immediately opened his mouth and spat out 2 words. Shoot. His voice was in order. Immediately, dozens of crisp gunshots rang out. The bullets whizzed out of the barrels as if they were carrying a trace of fire as they rushed forward. Even the moment the gunshots rang out, they sounded so orderly as if there was only one person firing from the beginning to the end. These were the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion, the strongest elites that Yang Chendong had spent a lot of effort to train. Under the high-intensity training and layers of tests, each and every one of the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty. When the gunshots rang out, the Walla cavalry charging toward them were like small trees that were swept up by a strong wind and fell to the ground one by one. At this moment, all of the 50 to 60 men fell off their horses. Only 56 horses that had lost their owners ran toward them. Try to capture as many war horses as possible for the lords to use. Yang Qindong looked at the results of the first round of shooting and nodded with satisfaction. His expression also relaxed a lot. Before seeing a real battle, even though Yang Qindong was extremely confident in his training, he still lacked confidence. Most of the time, training included drills and real battle were two different things. Now, after a wave of bullets, it was effective. All the enemies were hit and killed and no one was caught. This result was very satisfying and very gratifying. Chapter 138. After the order was given, Leng Feng grabbed the Vala horses one by one and brought them before the 9 ministers. What they received in return was a look of disbelief. Among the ministers, Kuang Ye's eyes were as wide as bells. What kind of firearm is this? How can it shoot so far and so accurately? Can you show it to me? Sorry, I can't. He watched as Kuang Ye's hand unconsciously reached for the gun in the hand of Leng Feng, who had delivered the horse to him. Kuang Yi moved his body slightly and dodged the gun. Then he looked at Leng Feng with a cold and murderous gaze. It was this look that made Kuang Ye's body tremble uncontrollably. At this moment he felt that he was so close to the god of death. Sorry, Minister Feng, they are mercenaries. They only took my money to do something. They won't listen to anyone and won't allow anyone to touch the weapons in their hands. If you insist on doing so, there's only one outcome, and that's becoming a dead man. I can't protect you on this point. Yang Qindong saw Kuang Ye's awkwardness. He knew that if he didn't make things clear, everyone would be suspicious. Since that was the case, he might as well make things clear and dispel these people's suspicions. As soon as this was said, the officials who were originally curious withdrew their gazes and looked down, as if they did not care about what was going on outside. If they touched it, they would die. The price of curiosity was too high. It was so high that they couldn't bear it. Even Minister Kuang Yi became a lot more honest at this time and even apologized. This old man was reckless just now, it's my fault. It's fine. The ignorant are innocent. Just don't do it. Yang Qindong smiled and turned to Xiao Feng. Our emperor hasn't been rescued and we haven't achieved our goal. We'll have to trouble you. Since they were collaborators, he had to be careful with his words. Xiao Feng, who was somewhat uncomfortable with Yang Qindong's attitude and tone of discussion, hurriedly said, Okay, since we've taken 6th young master's money, of course we'll do it well. Everyone listen up. Keep moving forward. A few hundred steps away, General Walla sat on his horse in a daze. Unknowingly, he already had the urge to pee and it was almost flowing out uncontrollably. 50 to 60 cavalrymen were wiped out in the blink of an eye. Not a single one of them was able to get within 90 paces. They all died. One had to know that all of them had died without a single survivor. This had never happened before in previous battles. No one had even thought that such a situation would occur. But now the truth had appeared. Again, let's go together and kill all of them. General Walla was angry. He didn't know that the emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty was already close at hand. He only needed 2 or 3 more charges to capture him alive. He was frightened by Yang Qindong's team. He felt that if he didn't deal with these people, it would be like a fishbone stuck in his throat and he wouldn't feel safe at all. Many of the remaining 200 or so Walla cavalry also saw this scene. At first they were indeed shocked, but with the general's shout, the heroic spirit in their hearts was stimulated. Each of them stared at the more than 100 people with covetous eyes, and then the cavalry charged. More than 200 cavalrymen against more than 100 people, and all of them were infantrymen. Moreover, there were no obstacles on the plains. No matter how one looked at it, there was no possibility of failure. Once the speed of the horses increased, the cavalry swords in their hands would only need to lightly slash and a big head would fly. Ah! All kinds of screams were heard and the Walla cavalry's charge began. With the help of the speed of the horses, the distance between the two sides was quickly shortened. Be careful, be careful. Kuang Yi, Wang Zui, and the other important officials were staring at the scene in front of them. Although they were already sitting on their horses, they still felt their bodies trembling. This was because they really didn't know how these mercenaries, as mentioned by Yang Qindong, would deal with more than 2 times the number of soldiers. This was naturally because they didn't understand these firearms. Their past experience told them that the power of firearms was indeed not small, but their weakness was also quite obvious. That was, after firing a shot they had to reload. In this way, when facing more than 2 times the number of enemies, the firearm soldiers didn't have the slightest advantage. Raise your guns ready to fire. Different from the previous time, this time, Xiao Feng also raised the 95 style in his hand. The increase in the number of enemies made him want to join in the battle. However, this action of his had indeed caused the other Lung Feng members to show dissatisfaction. It was just more than 2 times the number of enemies and they really didn't care about it. The battalion commander clearly wanted to satisfy his craving. Naturally, no one could guess the thoughts of the Lung Feng. Just when everyone thought that the battle was going to end badly, gunshots rang out. First, it was a volley of shots and almost half of the enemy's troops were eliminated. Then the gunshots were no longer as orderly as before, but it only gave the impression that there were a few more gunshots. Next, on the entire battlefield, only General Walla was escaping on his horse. At the most crucial moment, the general became afraid. He relied on his superb horsemanship to hide his body on the horse, and only then did he manage to dodge the shot. However, in front of the most elite Lung Feng, since you were already identified as a target, how could you escape? Even if you managed to dodge the first shot, you wouldn't be able to dodge the second. Xiao Feng raised his gun and after his breathing calmed down he moved his right index finger. After a crisp pause sound, the healthy horse fell to the ground. Once the healthy horse fell, General Walla naturally fell off the horse, then quickly got up and continued to run. However, after another gunshot, the body that was moving forward suddenly fell to the ground, and there was no more movement from it. The second shot was still fired by Xiao Feng. He wasn't arrogant enough to think that he could kill the target with one shot, so he only shot the horse to prepare himself for the next shot. 2 consecutive shots from the same gun finally killed General Walla, but at the same time, it opened Kuang Ye's eyes. Originally, he could tell that this gun was different from the guns in the Great Ming Dynasty, but he never expected that this gun could fire continuously, and from such a long distance with such accuracy. This scene was tantamount to giving him a solid lesson. Although he was not out of danger yet, at this time he was already considering whether he could buy such firearms from the army. If that was the case, why would the Great Ming Dynasty be afraid of a strong enemy? Xiao Feng's performance won Yang Qindong's applause. Not bad. Although it was only 2 words, it was enough to make Xiao Feng's face glow. He was even happier than if he had received a military medal. This was the 6th young master's praise. If Lung Song and Gao Xiong knew about it, they would probably be envious. Xiao Feng, who was satisfied, felt even more motivated. He immediately ordered, "Everyone listen to my orders. Search and move forward. If you find any danger, you don't have to report it. Deal with it yourself." This was equivalent to handing the right to fire to the individual. The 100 Lung Feng members immediately became excited. Their eyes kept searching for the enemy who might not be completely dead yet. Perhaps it was because their previous shooting skills were too accurate, but along the way they didn't find a single enemy that was not dead. This made the soldiers feel like they were not satisfied. On the contrary, Kuang Yi, Wang Zue, and the other important officials who followed them all the way breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. With such a powerful mercenary group accompanying them, their safety should be much more guaranteed. After more than 300 steps, Zhou Xian finally took off his armor and appeared in everyone's line of sight in a yellow robe. Compared to his usual high and mighty appearance at this moment, his eyes were filled with fear. His clothes were disheveled and there was even a small bruise on his face. The bruise was probably caused by falling to the ground. In short, he was currently in a sorry state. When he saw Yang Qindong and the others, his originally lifeless eyes immediately became filled with a strong desire for life. "Beloved official Yang, we are here. We are here. Check the injuries of the others and protect His Majesty." Yang Qindong also saw Zhou Xian. He then ran over to Zhou Xian's side, pretending to be terrified. Finally, he could grab Yang Qindong's hand. Zhou Xian said with a panicked expression, "Sir, you have misled me. You have misled me." At this moment, Zhou Xian still didn't forget to find a scapegoat for this great defeat. From this, it could be seen that no one who could become an emperor was simple. Yes, Eunuch Wang messed up the battle and caused a great defeat. He is guilty. However, he did it out of kindness. He just isn't good at leading troops. Yang Qindong knew how Zhou Xian felt about Wang Zhen. In history, this person was first captured and then sent back by Walla. He only regained the throne a few years later. However, once he took the throne, he didn't forget to build a colorful clay statue for Wang Zhen. He even built a monument for him. Just from this point alone, it could be seen how much Zhou Xian doted on Wang Zhen. He didn't believe that Zhou Xian would hate Wang Zhen just because of this great defeat. Furthermore, outsiders knew that he and Wang Zhen were working together. If he said anything overboard now, it would give people the impression that he was burning the bridge after crossing the river. Anyway, he had already been killed by Lung Feng. What did it matter if he said something nice? When Yang Qindong said this, Zhou Xian looked at him with admiration. He then said, "Beloved official Yang, you should send someone to see if you can find Sir. Perhaps he is fighting with the enemy somewhere." Chapter 139. Oh, okay. Yang Qindong nodded his head in agreement when he saw that it was true. This action was strongly opposed by Kuang Yi, Wang Zue and the others. "That won't do, Your Majesty. We don't have many soldiers by our side right now. If we send more people out and encounter the Walla cavalry, I'm afraid it will be disastrous. Your Majesty, please reconsider." If Wang Zhen was here, they wouldn't dare to say this. However, they knew that he wasn't here and that he was most likely dead. Even if it was for their own safety, they could say anything. That's right. We only have 100 mercenaries by our side. If we ask them for help, it will definitely divide our strength. If we encounter another enemy, we won't even know if we're dead or alive. Yang Qindong naturally wouldn't send Lung Feng to search for Wang Zhen. Wang Zhen was already dead. What was the point of searching for him? Thus he pretended to be in a difficult position. When he mentioned that searching for Wang Zhen would divide their strength and put them in danger, Zhou Qian's desire to search for Wang Zhen wasn't as strong. After all, no matter how good their relationship was, if there was a possibility of losing their lives, they would have to think twice. "Sigh, all right. I believe that Sir will be blessed by the heavens. He should be fine." Zhou Qian was forced to give up on searching for Wang Zhen. However, he then looked at Yang Qindong and said, "Beloved official Yang, who are these people? How did they have the strength to kill so many Walla cavalry and come to my side?" "Your Majesty, please forgive this subject for his innocence." Yang Qindong knew that this was an excellent opportunity to reveal the identities of Xiao Feng and the others. Of course, he wouldn't miss it. Thus he pretended to be guilty as he spoke. "Sigh, beloved official Yang, why are you doing this? You saved me. This is a great merit. How can I blame you?" Zhou Qian grabbed Yang Qindong and didn't let him kneel down. Instead, he spoke with an excited expression. It had to be said that Zhou Qian had a way of grasping people's hearts. Just like those words just now, anyone who heard it would be inexplicably grateful, and even have the thought of going through water and treading on fire to repay the emperor's kindness. But who was Yang Qindong? In the future, being a monarch was just a status symbol to him. It was absolutely impossible for him to swear loyalty because of this. At the very least, it was not something that an incapable ruler like Zhou Qian could do. In his heart, he didn't take Zhou Qian's words to heart, but on the surface he pretended to be extremely touched and said, "How could this subject save the emperor? It's clear that the emperor is blessed by the heavens, which led this subject to rush over." Zhou Qian's face lit up with joy after hearing those words. His fearful expression seemed to have relaxed quite a bit. "Your Majesty, the reason why I said I was guilty was because I was afraid of death. That's why I spent a lot of money to hire these foreign mercenaries. They only recognize money and not people. In their eyes, there is no distinction between country and region. They will work for whoever can pay them. Your Majesty also knows that this subject doesn't lack money. I did it for the sake of my own safety. But I didn't report it to Your Majesty in advance, which is also a crime." There was a dignified opportunity to say the identity of Xiao Feng and the others to Zhou Qian. As long as he knew, this matter would be legalized. Sure enough, when Zhou Qian heard this, he nodded with an understanding look. "Good. Beloved official Yang is always prepared for a rainy day. But I just don't know how much they are so powerful." Zhou Qian wasn't the only one who thought this way. The other ministers were also very curious. After seeing the power of this mercenary army, they really wanted to know how much it was. In fact, the one who was most concerned about it was Zhou Qian. Although he didn't see it personally, to be able to come in front of him in the midst of the chaos, they must have some ability. Then if everyone could hire such a powerful army, Wouldn't it mean that they had the capital to rebel? How could he not pay attention to it? Feeling everyone's gaze on him, Yang Qindong smiled and said, "Your Majesty. Coincidentally, they weren't hired by me in the beginning. They were barbarians from overseas who did business with me. This time, they were in charge of delivering goods to the skies beyond trading company. When I met them, the army was about to go to war. I discussed it with them and asked them to protect me for 10,000 taels per person. If it weren't for this coincidence, I'm afraid that they wouldn't be interested in such a small amount of money. 10,000 taels per person, 100 people would be 1,000,000 taels." After hearing this, Kuang Yi and Wang Zue couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Especially Wang Zue. As the Minister of Revenue, he had a clear understanding of the great Ming dynasty's money. The value of the money that passed through his hands every year was very large. However, even he was shocked when he heard the price, not to mention the other important ministers. This answer also shocked Zhou Xian so much that he broke out in a cold sweat. 1,000,000 taels of silver just to protect him? This Yang Qindong was really too rich. Of course, he was probably the only person in the entire court who could afford such a price. After all, whether it was the Immortal abode or the skies beyond trading company, large amounts of money flowed in every day. This answer also allowed Zhou Xian to breathe a sigh of relief. The higher the price of the mercenary army, the more relieved he would be. It also showed that not everyone had the ability to hire this army and achieve great things to threaten him. While they were talking, Tiger's Mane walked up to Yang Qindong. "Young master, apart from General Fan Zhong's injuries, the rest of the Tiger's Mane didn't continue, but his continuous shaking of his head explained everything. When Yang Qindong heard this, he didn't make any decisions. Instead, he looked at Zhou Xian with an expression that said, "You're the emperor, so you should make the decisions. Forget it, just let them be. When we return to the palace, we will reward their families greatly. As for what happens next, beloved Minister Yang and my other beloved ministers, what do you all think?" Zhou Xian was very satisfied with Yang Qindong's attitude, but he really didn't have any ideas right now. After the army's defeat, his mind was already in a mess. Although he said he was asking the ministers, everyone's eyes were actually on Yang Qindong. It was clear that they had long since run out of ideas. In a situation where they were surrounded by enemies, there seemed to be no path out that was safe. Since he was the one who came up with the idea, Yang Qindong didn't hold back. He knew that the longer they stayed here, the greater the danger they would be in. Previously, because all of the Walla cavalry had been wiped out, the news didn't spread. But once the Walla army found out about their tracks, once the army pressed on with only 100 people, there was still danger. Alright, since the emperor has given this important task to this subject will give his own suggestion. Our current position is naturally the closest to Huailai County, but that place is also the most dangerous. The Walla will definitely be on guard against us and will definitely arrange a large number of troops there. Then we might as well do the opposite and go to Yuzhou. Yang Qindong acted as if he had a card up his sleeve. In reality, this was also his plan from the beginning. That's right, catch them off guard and attack them when they least expect it. The art of war says that what is false and what is true and what is false. I'm sure no one will think that we will go to Yuzhou. After hearing Yang Qindong's suggestion, Minister of War Kuang Yi immediately supported it. Yang Qindong and Kuang Yi, who understood the art of war, both had the same idea. Zhou Xian's heart was set. Alright, then we will go to Yuzhou. After saying that, he got up and prepared to leave. But he was stopped by Yang Qindong. What is the meaning of this, Minister Yang? Zhou Xian's expression changed greatly. He was afraid that this person would have evil intentions towards him. If that was the case, then with only the injured General Fan Zhong, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to protect himself. Yang Qindong, what are you doing? Fan Zhong stepped forward with his hammer in hand in a questioning manner. But before he could get close, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei and Yang Wu had already surrounded him from 3 directions. It was guaranteed that if he took another step forward, his blood would splatter 5 feet and he would fall to the ground and die. The situation suddenly became tense. Yang Qindong hurriedly gave Tiger's Mane and the others a look to retreat, then half knelt in front of Zhou Xian. Your Majesty, this subject doesn't have any other intentions. It's just that if we are going to escape, Your Majesty must change your clothes. Change my clothes? Why? Zhou Xian was puzzled. Your Majesty, wearing a yellow robe will easily attract other people's attention. It will also easily attract the Walla cavalry's pursuit. Yang Qindong cursed the other party's pig head in his heart, but on the surface he looked like he was advising him. At this moment Zhou Xian came to his senses and nodded. That's right. Beloved official Yang is right. Since that's the case, we will take off the yellow robe. Yes, Your Majesty not only has to take off the robe, but also put it on someone else to confuse the enemy's attention. Yang Qindong's words shocked Kuang Yi and the other officials, causing them to become nervous. They first looked at each other, then slowly lowered their heads. These people's reactions fell into the eyes of Yang Qindong and Zhou Xian, and the latter was naturally unhappy. The former lowered his head and smiled, but when he looked up he had already returned to his serious state. Your Majesty can put the yellow robe on Hu Ben, who died with a similar figure to you, to create a false image and use it to confuse the enemy. Hearing that they were going to let the dead wear clothes, Kuang Yi and the others raised their heads one by one, and their expressions returned to normal. Zhou Xian suddenly understood and said, "That's right. Beloved official Yang is right. This way the Walla army will think that we have already ascended to heaven. This way no one will pursue us." Chapter 140. Your Majesty is wise. Yang Qindong and several other important officials all knelt on the ground with respectful expressions. Officials, please rise. I will take off my clothes now. Zhou Xian seemed to have found the feeling of being an emperor again. With a laugh he took off his yellow robe. Soon Hu Ben, whose body was similar to Zhou Xian's, was brought in front of everyone. More importantly, his face had been cut several times. Everyone worked together and put the yellow robe on the body of the dead. Then they identified the direction of Yuzhou and hurried over. About 2 hours after they left, a group of about 500 Walla cavalry rushed over. Among them was a eunuch wearing a eunuch uniform. This person was Xining and could be considered an important eunuch in the group. Xining followed the army out. When the chaos broke out, he was unfortunately caught by the Walla cavalry. Just as they were about to cut him to death, he shouted out his identity and said that he could help the Walla army find Mingyingzong. In this way the Ming dynasty would be within their reach. Xining's words were too enticing. When the Walla general heard it, he couldn't help but be moved. Thus he didn't kill him. Instead he brought him to search for news of Zhou Xian. This group of people was led by the Walla king and Xining was among them. When they arrived at the battlefield, the bright yellow robe was immediately noticed by everyone. Xining got off his horse and walked over to the corpse that was already unrecognizable. He carefully searched it and found Zhou Xian's jade pendant. He immediately said with joy, "General, this is the Ming dynasty emperor, but he is already dead." Dead? Say. Hearing that Zhou Xian was dead, a trace of hatred appeared on the Walla king's face. It was clear that a dead person had no effect on him. Noticing the disappointment on the competition king's face, Xining, who was afraid that he would lose his life, rolled his eyes and said, "General, although the Ming dynasty emperor is already dead, we still have the jade pendant in our hands. We can still do something. I presume that this chaotic news will cause the Ming army to panic, and if we can use this chance we might be able to attack the capital. Sir is very familiar with that place with its countless treasures and beauties." Speaking of the prosperity of the capital as a former emissary, how could the periodical king not know of it? Immediately his expression changed from worry to joy as he said, Good. Go. Follow me to see the leader. We are preparing to attack the capital of the great Ming dynasty." Zhou Xian had intentionally left the waist pendant behind, saying that it was to make it more realistic. He didn't expect that it would come in handy and become an item to identify his identity. At this time, Great Mingyingzong, who had changed into a bright tiger robe, was currently heading towards Xianxia with Yang Qindong and his group. Even if they didn't choose to walk to the front, they still encountered 2 of Walla's cavalry units. Each side had 100 cavalrymen, but when they met the cold front they were like live targets. Before they could see clearly what kind of formation was on the other side and who was on the other side, they were all killed from afar. This was also the first time Zhou Xian saw the power of the cold front at such a close distance. For a moment his heart was filled with fear. But when he thought that they were now being used by him, he couldn't help but feel relieved. Now that they had more healthy horses and more food from the bodies of the Walla cavalry, everyone began to speed up after eating and drinking to their heart's content. Regardless of whether it was day or night, they headed straight for Yuzhou. Xining was brought to his elder brother Yeshen, who was also the leader of the Walla, by the periodical king. Yeshen was tall and sturdy, and there was a sense of superiority in his eyes. His eyes were deep and sharp, and when he looked at Xining he was so scared that his heart jumped. "You said that this belongs to your Ming emperor?" Yeshen asked casually as he played with the seemingly expensive waist pendant in his hand. Yes, Lord Chief, this belongs to our Ming emperor. He has already been killed by the brave Walla cavalry." Xining knelt on the ground like a servant. After saying this, he was afraid that the other party wouldn't believe him, so he added, "This little one is a eunuch who follows the Ming emperor, so of course I wouldn't be wrong. Also, this little one is a Nuzanren, not a Han. I have long been looking forward to the army trampling on the great Ming dynasty and repeating the glory of the grassland people." Xining was really afraid that he would die. At this moment he didn't want to say anything nice, but he was afraid that Yeshen would kill him if he was unhappy. Xining's attitude made Yeshen believe him. "Even if the Ming emperor is dead, do you think that their capital is now in chaos?" Previously, because the leader of the periodical king's guards Tuj angered Yang Chendong, all the spies of the Wara in the great Ming dynasty's capital were exposed and killed. If he wanted to understand the situation of the great Ming dynasty, he could only ask this little eunuch in front of him. Xining was afraid that Yeshen would kill him without asking any questions. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to show his value. Now, as long as the other party was willing to ask him, it proved that he was useful and his life was not in danger. And in order to better express himself and also to show his importance, he who was kneeling on the ground analyzed, "Leader, what the Ming dynasty does not lack the least is the emperor. The size of the imperial family is beyond our imagination. Even if the current emperor is dead, they can still elect a new emperor at any time." "What?" Xining's answer made Yeshen very unhappy. "Doesn't that mean that it's useless for us to kill the Ming emperor?" No, it's not like that." Xining shook his head like a rattle drum. "Although the royal family of the Ming dynasty is very large, it's not difficult for them to elect a new emperor. However, it's difficult for a new emperor to gain power in a short period of time, and this is our opportunity. Therefore, we can't announce the death of the Ming emperor immediately. If we do, it will only give the other party more time to prepare. We can first march to the capital, and when the army reaches the city, we can announce the death of the Ming emperor. This way, even if they elect a new emperor, it will be difficult for them to form any resistance. At that time, the new regime will be replaced by the old regime and it will be chaotic. This way we can suppress the city with our army. At that time, this lowly one can persuade my friends, and perhaps we can open the city gates without shedding a drop of blood and completely enter the capital." Zhu Xian was already dead, and to Xining he had no hope. Even if he could safely return to the capital, how could another emperor trust him as much as Yingzong did? Perhaps the other eunuchs would be eager to kill him. Since there was no way out, he might as well vote for Walla. With his contributions in planning, once Walla succeeded, he might be able to become a powerful eunuch like Wang Zhen. At this moment, Xining seemed to see the glorious light of the future. In order to achieve this goal, he really did his best to plan for Yeshen. After hearing Xining's words, Yeshen was also moved. Originally, he only wanted to attack the border of the Ming dynasty to show his strength. However, he didn't expect to win the battle and even kill the Ming emperor. Now that he had the opportunity to enter the capital of the Ming dynasty, how could he give it up? Thinking back, he once asked the Ming emperor to marry a princess to him for the purpose of seeking peace, but he was rejected. Now, if he could enter the capital, wouldn't he be able to choose all the princesses? He would also be able to take revenge for the humiliation he suffered back then. Xining's proposal was accepted by Yeshen. Next, Walla's army began to clean up the battlefield. In terms of firearms alone, there were 14 great general cannons, 2,161 divine cannons, and 4,223 divine spears. In addition to other military necessities, it could be said that the harvest was quite bountiful. In the Ming army, Duke Ingong Zhangfu, Marquis Tai Ning Chen Ying, Prince Consort Jing Yuan, Count Pingxiang Chen Huai, Count Xiangqing Li Zhen, Count Sui and Chen Sun, Count Xiu Shenrong, Governor Liang Qing Wang Gui, Scholar Chao Nai Zhang Yi, Hanlin Academy attendant Scholar Zhang Yi, Left Governor Gong Quanan of the Office of Transmission, Dai Qingzu of Taichung Temple Wang Yiju, Bao Liangzhua of the Imperial Secretariat, Yao Xian Bao Hui Censor Yu Gong Pan Qing Qian Yu Censor. Zhang Hong Huang Chong Wei Zhen Xia Qing Yin Hong Tong Kund, Sun Qing Lin Xiangfeng Lang Zhong Qi Wang Feng Xueming Minister Counselor Wang Jian Qing Siwen Qing Qing Lu Duan, Manager Yu Jian Zhang Tang Xing Xian, Deputy Ma Yu of the Supreme Court Yin Chong, Pedestrian Luo Ruyong, Xia Guanjing of the Imperial Astronomer, Lu Exin of the Imperial Astronomer, Li Gong Shiyu, and others all died in the battle. In this battle more than half of the Ming army died, and a large amount of supplies were plundered by Yes Hen. Only the minister of the Supreme Court Xiao Weizhen, and a few others luckily escaped. Then there were the 9 important officials that Yang Chendong had saved. The 500,000 soldiers left behind by Ming Qingzu Zhu had been completely wiped out, and the 3 most elite battalions had also been destroyed. The development of firearms for the army had been greatly hindered, and the gates to the capital had been opened. In the history of the Ming dynasty, this battle was known as the defeat of Tumu. This defeat had far-reaching effects, becoming the turning point for the Ming dynasty from the early to the middle stages. In the capital, when the news of Tumu's defeat reached the capital, everyone felt like they had been hit in the head with a stick. The streets were abuzz with discussion, and a chaotic situation was about to unfold. The imperial court was in an uproar, but no one was in charge. The imperial court was in a state of panic, and Zhu Qiyu, who was temporarily in charge of court affairs, felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles. He had originally thought that he was only temporarily in charge of court affairs, and if there were any problems the officials would deal with them. He was just putting on an act, waiting for Emperor Zhu Qian to return so that he could report on his task perfectly and continue to be a king. But he had never imagined that the army would be defeated, and defeated so miserably. According to the news from the front lines, the field was littered with corpses. Now there was no news of Emperor Zhu Qian. To say something disrespectful, no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Since no one knew whether the emperor was dead or alive, his burden had undoubtedly become very heavy. Just like now, all the officials were asking him for his opinion, causing him to feel uneasy and unsure of how to respond. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.